Chapter 91. The common people had a simple life. They worked from sunrise to sunset. They busied themselves in order to put 3 meals a day on the table and support their livelihood. If they could marry a wife and give birth to 2 plump babies, that would be even wonderful. Most of the people in Pingjiang were the same, but Pingjiang was wealthy, so besides farming, the people could find a lot of other work in the city. Doormen or gatekeepers, manual workers, they could always find a bite to eat. Even climbing up the mountains to chop firewood to sell or being a porter of goods, they did not have to worry about dying of starvation. If those who were extra lucky and earned some money, they could buy a few servants, and there would be people to serve and wait on their family. But these people all had one thing in common, that was, they were completely illiterate. Although the common people were obedient, if they were too ignorant, they could easily be incited by those with ulterior motives. Especially in times of turmoil and chaos and people were in panic all day long. In such times, the common people even more so needed to find spiritual sustenance. Thus countless cults were conceived. These cults wantonly recruited followers, asking them to provide money, food, and their own daughters. They accumulated strength in order to get a share of the pie during troubled times. Pingjiang now had a few small forces. Although they had yet to make much impact, Lin Yuan was not ready to watch them grow big. On the surface, Song Lian was spreading literacy among the common people, but in fact he was going to suppress and eliminate these forces. It would also be a good opportunity for Lin Yuan to measure his ability. If Song Lian could not do these things, Lin Yuan could only have him go repair books. Lord Song. Wu Changqing came to visit Song Lian with a gift. After all, he was a newcomer who had been in the limelight recently and Wu Changqing was not willing to offend him. As fellow officials it was not a bad thing to maintain a superficial friendship. Song Lian had already heard the doorman report his visit early. He put down the book in his hand and greeted him with a smile. Lord Wu, it's an honor to meet you at last. Wu Changqing, Lord Song came from afar, have you become used to here yet? Song Lian smiled and said, naturally, the land south of the Yangtze River, paradise on earth. Song Lian waved his hand, Lord Wu, please have a seat. Just as Wu Changqing sat down, a servant brought in a pot of warm wine. The two of them sat and drank together, the moonlight shining from outside the window. It is often said that Lord Song has a good and gentlemanly character. Seeing you today, it is indeed well deserved. Wu Changqing smiled and spoke praises. He was always like this, able to appear natural and righteous when flattering others, making people unable to feel any hypocrisy at all. Song Lian didn't say anything to that. He just said, Song has just arrived and doesn't know the current situation of Pingjiang, so I have to trouble Lord Wu. Wu Changqing waved his hand and said, what difficulty is this? How can it be called trouble? Since Lord Song asked, I will naturally answer. Pingjiang is rich in water and food and the people are honest and loyal, but there is no lack of treacherous villains who want to take advantage of the people's simple nature. Song Lian personally poured a cup of wine for Wu Changqing. Wu Changqing raised his cup and drank it in one swallow. Although those people are contemptible, water droplets can still drip through the rocks and gather into rivers. If they are allowed to run freely, they will one day become a calamity. Song Lian understood. He looked down and it took a while before he raised his head back up again. He said to Wu Changqing, thank you, Lord Wu, for clearing up my doubts. Wu Changqing also cupped his hands. As officials serving the same ruler, naturally we must stand against the same enemies. What our Lord hates most now is the surrounding people having constant suspicions of each other while the foreign enemies are yet to be dealt with. This was a reminder. Regardless of their personal thoughts and interests in private, they had to maintain harmony on the surface. Those who caused trouble to their superiors would be the unlucky ones in the end. Wu Changqing left Song Lian's manor and got on the carriage. The old servant handed over the sobering tea that he had prepared earlier. Wu Changqing drank a sip of tea and felt discomfort in his throat. He lifted the window curtains of the carriage to look up at the sky. Dark clouds blocked the moon, signaling that tomorrow might be a rainy day. He had a smile on his lips as he sighed leisurely. Newcomers would always come one after another, and old officials like them would always have to show a generous spirit. How many officials below wanted to kill Song Shaishao? If Song Shaishao was not cautious, he would not have enough lives to lose by now. Song Shaishao was now like the most beloved concubine in the harem. The emperor had only him in his eyes and only loved him. If other concubines could not kill him, then they would be unable to rise up the ranks. They were all serving the same person, so while they did not seek equal treatment, they did seek a share of the favor. Others could not be blamed for hating him. Wu Changqing smiled. The moonlight is just right tonight. The driver who drove the carriage looked up at the sky. Was there something wrong with his master's eyes? The moon was covered with clouds. Where was there any moonlight? Leader. In a dark alley late at night, a man in commoner attire stood anxiously outside the house. Only then did the voices of men and women inside the house came to an end. The simple wooden door was pushed open from the inside, and the man who appeared with his clothes open wide, revealing a chest covered with red marks. He was tall, with a square face and a wide forehead, possessing a magnanimous appearance. At this time, his brows were furrowed and he said to the person at his door, "What's the matter? Can't you come to find this leader tomorrow? This is the middle of the night. Even if you don't want to sleep, this leader needs to sleep." The coquettish voice of a woman in the house called out, "Leader." The man said impatiently, "Go back to sleep." He strode out, and the man in commoner attire followed behind him. The two went to a secluded house. After lighting the candles, the man in commoner attire said, "Leader, since that South Bodhisattva occupied Pingjiang, he has used a lot of scheming and manipulation. Many members of the sect are not as they used to be. This subordinate went to investigate today, and found that many already want to leave the sect." The man in commoner attire bursted into tears. "Leader, if we don't do anything, I am afraid that South Bodhisattva will confuse people. Now it's 1 or 2 out of 10 people, but I'm afraid that after some time, not even one will remain." The name of this religious sect was the Little White Lotus sect, which was not the same as the White Lotus sect. It was just borrowing the name of the latter. However, the common people thought that this Little White Lotus sect was also a branch of the White Lotus sect. In Lin Yuan's history back in his previous life, this Little White Lotus sect had already become quite big in Pingjiang, which gave the original government a headache. The leader pressed his lips tightly. It was an accidental occurrence that he established this Little White Lotus sect. He was originally just a porter, relying on transporting goods to make a living. At first, he just wanted to live a good life. Although working as a porter in Pingjiang would not have him go hungry, his social status was very low. Anyone could step on him with their feet. When he bumped into a nobleman on the road, it was common to be spit on and beaten. He could barely eat any meat a year. At that time, his wish was to one day be able to eat all the meat he wanted. Slowly, under the guise of the White Lotus sect, he gathered a group of people. He eventually accumulated believers, offerings, and beauties. He liked days like this, eating, drinking and having fun every day, with beautiful women on his left and fine wine on his right. He didn't want to fight against those in power. He knew very well that a few thousand believers were no match for tens of thousands of trained troops. He was just an ordinary commoner. Although he was doing well now, he still feared those in power. He wanted to say, "We are doing well now, and our days are going well. So why do we have to fight against those people who control heavy military power? Isn't it good to be content with what one has?" But he couldn't say that. The people who followed him have ambitions. If he said so, he had no doubt that these people would kill him and support someone else who agreed with them to become the leader. He looked at this person who was crying in front of him, and he had no doubt that if he said that he did not want to be an enemy of the South Bodhisattva, this person would be able to take his life immediately. So he could only say that South Bodhisattva is sinister and vicious, and his methods are fierce. Why don't we take it slowly? If we become his enemies right now, I am afraid that with our current strength, we will just be sheep under the tiger's mouth. The man in commoner attire hurriedly said, "Leader needs to know that it has just been a month since the South Bodhisattva took over Pingjiang, and even the King of Heaven would have difficulty gaining the people's loyalty in such a short time. At this time, he is not yet standing firmly, so we still have a chance. If we really take things slowly, I'm afraid we won't even be able to stand against a single hit by that time." "Don't say any more," the leader said angrily. "Am I the leader or are you the leader? Do my words matter or yours do? You actually want to order me around now? It seems that you no longer want to obey others. In your eyes, even a leader holds no regard. How about you take the seat of the leader instead? I see that I have been sitting in your seat for too long, making you restless and discontent this whole time." The man in commoner attire knelt down quickly, walking a few steps to the front of the leader on his knees, and then prostrated himself. "Leader, don't miss this opportunity. This is our last chance. If we don't fight hard, we will become the fish under the South Bodhisattva's knife. Leader, get out." The leader shouted. "I tell you to get out. Get out." The man in commoner attire looked at the man in front of him incredulously. He still remembered how pleasant the words this man spoke when he was invited to join the sect by this man. He had thought he was following a broad-minded and ambitious master, but he didn't expect that at this moment, this person was still too timid and afraid to act. Was this the master he chose for himself? "Leader, please think twice." The man in commoner attire knocked his head on the ground a few times before leaving the house. The leader sat alone in the house, and when the person left completely, his disguised anger disappeared without a trace. He personally watched Pingjiang being trampled down by the iron hooves of the South Bodhisattva. It was the first time he saw real warfare. The imperial court's forces were unable to resist at all. He still remembered the huge explosions he heard and remembered seeing the huge trebuchets, that organized and rigorous army, the sharp blades in the soldiers' hands. Those people didn't break into the city of Pingjiang, but he was in the village on the edge of the city. He knew exactly what behemoth he was facing. He was afraid of death. He could hide in the corner and dominate those weaker than him, but he never thought of really fighting against authority. Even when the imperial court was weak, he dared not do anything. What was more, this South Bodhisattva was more powerful and more popular than the imperial court now. He just wanted to live a good life, wear luxurious clothes, have servants waiting on his needs, and beauties accompanying by his side. He was already very satisfied. But the people around him always forced him. They wanted to be prosperous and wealthy, so they pushed him forward. And he also needed their strength to consolidate his position. But now, they were going to push him to his death. They all want to make a last struggle, but the leader knew very clearly. This was no last struggle but an obvious offering of their necks to commit suicide. But he couldn't speak the truth to them yet. The leader sat awake all night. He looked at the sunlight as dawn broke and the sky lightened. After thinking about it all night, he thought of a way. He wanted to live a good life, so he would not listen to those people. Prepare a carriage. Where does Master plan to go? Go to Wu Manor. He heard that Wu Changqing was a good person. Whether it was true or not, at least his reputation was there. For the sake of his reputation, he couldn't kill someone like him who went to surrender. Chapter 92. The Little White Lotus sect was one of the Pingjiang cults that was neither high nor low in terms of influence. There were 3,000 believers, and these 3,000 believers included both men and women, but most of them were poor, not even any slightly well-off commoners. But this had one advantage. That was, people at the upper echelons of the sect actually didn't receive many offerings. Probably enough to eat and drink, but it was impossible to buy weapons and raise soldiers. It took a huge amount of financial resources to raise soldiers, and even if it was just a few hundred soldiers, the money and food consumed was still not a small number. After all, people who were willing to exchange their lives for a bright future would only be convinced if they could see the benefits. Even if they caught and dragged the people into the barracks, if these people wanted to run, they would always find a chance to run. But the thing to be most afraid of was not that they would run, but these group of soldiers uniting together in the face of a common enemy, their capturers, and thus putting them in a dilemma. Wu Changqing was quite proud and self-satisfied these days. He was originally just a county magistrate, but after being transferred to Pingjiang he became the district head. How can one not be unhappy about the joy of being promoted and getting rich? Only now did he know what it was like to be flattered by others. But the more he was flattered, the more serious he became. After all, he was an old official who had followed Lin Yuan since Jiayu, and he knew Lin Yuan's temper better than others. The South Bodhisattva did have the heart of a Buddha, but this heart was only for the common people, and not for officials like them. He still remembered what Lin Yuan once said to them: "If you do a good job, I can give you money and power. If you don't do a good job, I will cut off your head. There are countless heads who want to take your places, and I can always find the next suitable one." At that time, Those officials who heard this were all terrified and struck with fear. The South Bodhisattva was not a monarch one could control. He was not a weak monarch, on the contrary, he had the potential to be a tyrant. The biggest feature of tyrants was that they always meant what they said, their methods cruel and vicious. It was just that the viciousness of this tyrant was used against the enemy and his officials. Wu Changqing had his servant pour a cup of tea for the man in front of him, and asked with a smile on his face, "Little White Lotus sect?" The surname of the leader was Bao Shisan, but he changed his name after becoming the leader to Bao Jianga. Wu Changqing sighed in his heart when he first saw this person. People with such a righteous appearance were very rare indeed. He had a wide face, big eyes and thick eyebrows, his aura righteous. No wonder he could attract believers. If he was crafty-looking and shifty-eyed, people would suspect that he had other intentions, let alone gain any believers. At this time, people believed that a gentleman had the appearance of a gentleman, and a villain had the appearance of a villain, and each person's appearance was a reflection of one's heart and nature. Bao Jianga carried himself with magnanimity. Even if he was not such a person, he had been put on a pedestal for so long, so while the inside might not have changed all that much, the outside would still show a trace of change. At least he exhibited no timidity in front of Wu Changqing. Bao Jianga said, "If my lord can protect this humble one will tell you everything I know." Wu Changqing smiled, "Have some tea." The two of them just sat like this, and Bao Jianga soon did not appear as at ease as before, as if there were needles under his buttocks. Wu Changqing looked at Bao Jianga and knew that the time had come. He said, "Recently, his lord can't tolerate even a speck of sand in his eyes. Even if you didn't come here, the Little White Lotus sect will not last much longer." Bao Jianga breathing stopped for a moment. He could feel the threat, and this threat made him shudder. Wu Changqing also said, "However, there is something you can tell me so that I might be able to help you be spared." Bao Jianga did not dare to speak. He was afraid that if he said, those people would try to kill him no matter what. Wu Changqing also seemed to see his worries, and said softly, "If you want to surrender, then don't leave any retreat route. If you do, then neither of the two sides will be pleased, and you will be put in a difficult situation." The cold sweat on Bao Jianga's forehead fell, and after a while, he said with shaking hands, "This humble one knows the identities and addresses of the leaders of other cults and their capable subordinates." Wu Changqing, "Very good, virtuous brother, those who act decisively are wise men. Come in, send this virtuous brother to Lord Song's manor. Serve him well the whole way, no slacking off." Wu Changqing had someone send Bao Jiangan out. He knew that Lin Yuan valued Song Lian, so being able to effortlessly express his goodwill in such a way, why not? It was not like he would lose a pound or two of meat. He expressed his goodwill, and no matter how much it was worth to the other, he still got some advantage. Thus, Bao Jianga was sent to Song Lian's manor. Song Lian was one of the literati, cultured and refined, his mannerisms and gestures polite and with a hint of a scholarly air. But at the same time he wouldn't give people an aloof feeling. Bao Jianga didn't even know what he was saying, but after coming back to his senses, he realized that he had given away everything he knew. Then Bao Jianga was locked up in a courtyard residence. He knew that he might not be able to get out of this place, but his mistress was also sent in with him. He had food and drink every day, and he didn't have to work to support himself. Being kept and fed for free, he was also content enough. Leader Bao is missing. He hasn't been seen for a month. What happened? Quickly, go to Jiang's tea house. That leader of the Little White Lotus sect is telling his life story in the tea house. What a rare novelty, nobody actually cares to stop him. How do I know? Maybe the big lords above also discovered the benefits of the Little White Lotus sect. The common people and the sect believers flooded into the Jiang's tea house. There were so many people that it couldn't fit in anymore. They could only watch from the windows, crowds against crowds. There was not even such a big scene during the New Year's. The owner of the Jiang's tea house smiled so much that his eyes disappeared and all of his teeth could be seen. When today was over, his Jiang's tea house would be known throughout Pingjiang. This was also the first time Bao Jianga also saw such a big scene. He had never been so nervous when facing believers in the past as he did now facing this crowd. He remembered what Song Lian said to him last night. Leader Bao must also not want to remain here all the time. If you want to go out, you must share the worries for our Lord. He had come here to share in his Lord's worries. Bao Jianga swallowed. My surname is Bao, and I was originally the leader of the Little White Lotus sect. The believers cried, "Leader! Leader! We are here." Bao Jianga looked at the believers, his feelings conflicted. Those who came here were all ordinary believers. They didn't know the twists and turns inside. Those who hadn't come were probably thinking about how they could kill him before he could tell the truth. Having already reached this point, there was no turning back. A few years ago, Bao was just like everyone else, just an ordinary commoner. My parents and brothers died early, and all I had to worry about was just feeding myself. I supported myself by working as a porter and the days were difficult. Bao Jianga's emotions finally calmed down. He remembered the days before, busy running around every day for a living. He used to feel bitter, but now that he thought about it, it was not all that bitter really. While he was looked down on, he could still fill his stomach. Life was simple, even just a single dish of meat had him feeling content. Later, I heard that the White Lotus sect in the north was so powerful that they lived a life of lords, so my thoughts slowly turned. I borrowed the name of the White Lotus sect to create the Little White Lotus sect. At that time, I just wanted to accept some believers who would give me some offerings, so that I could live a better life and save up enough money to marry a wife. But for some reason, there were more and more believers, and the number of people who followed Bao became more and more. Like being driven to join the Liangshan Mountain rebels, I had no choice but to move forward. TN, driven to join the Liangshan Mountain rebels equals to force SB to desperate action. The subordinates around me also have their own thoughts and interests. Since Han Shantong could establish himself as emperor and Han Liner can claim to be the emperor, they also felt that I could do the same. At that time, everybody could be an official and enjoy glory and wealth. Speak him got to hear, the believers listening below had already gone half crazy. Leader. Someone must have forced Leader to say this. Leader. Don't say any more, don't say any more. Bao Jianga remained unmoved. The sect believers offered virgin boys and girls. I didn't keep any of them. My subordinates took them away and kept them instead. After playing them to death or disability, towards the believers they would say that the gods had taken their children away to live a good life. You beasts in human skin. The woman was in her 40s, her face malnourished and thin. She wore a cloth attire and had a look of bitter sadness. In the beginning she was just listening numbly, but at this time, she screamed like she had gone crazy. I know. I already know everything. I saw the bones of my son. They just threw him in the wild. I saw it when I went to pick wild vegetables. My son was only 12 years old. How can you do such a thing? How can you do such a thing? You beasts. The person next to her who was not a believer asked her, then why didn't you tell others? That's right, your son died, but as the mother you didn't seek justice for him? The woman was too skinny, so thin she looked like a skeleton, her eyes protruding out and her lips trembling as she said, I did, I told my family. The others asked the man standing next to her, that was not only her son, but also your son. You, as the father, actually don't care about your son's life? The middle-aged man with a crouched back looked like an old man, his temples white. If one didn't know his age, he would be taken as a person in his 60s. His lips trembled slightly and he didn't dare to look up at the people. How can that be spoken? The people in our village are all followers of the Little White Lotus sect. They all believe in the leader, who will believe me. A scholar in the village said that the Little White Lotus sect was just pretending and deceiving us, and then died in the middle of the night. My family can't even compare to that scholar. I still have 2 daughters and 3 more sons. A tear fell from the man's eyes. With one already dead, how could I let the whole family join him below? The people looked at this family with pity. Some believers also shouted, where is my son? Where is my daughter? I even prepared a dowry for my daughter. Bao Jianga continued, most of those who are good-looking are still in the houses of my subordinates. Those who were not either died or were sold to the brothel. Those young boys and girls thought that they could live a good life when they were sent to the leader. But only when they went there did they know that it was hell on earth waiting for them. Bao Jianga, Bao has sinned. He looked at the tearful believers and the ignorant commoners, and then slowly bent his knees and knelt in front of them. He was originally just one of these people. Since when did he stop treating human lives as human lives? When did he begin to feel that it was natural to give away the offered child virgins to his subordinates? Bao Jianga lowered his head. After he was dead, would he go down to the 18th level of hell? Chapter 93. The Little White Lotus sect is no divine sect, it is simply a cult of evil. Inside is just a pile of filthy and nauseating things, completely unheard of. Scholars gathered to chat. There were many people in the tea house. These scholars discussed this recent event on the side, and around them there were also many people listening with their ears perked. Scholars were trendsetters. Generally speaking, even if the common people did not understand, they would still follow along and agree that whatever the scholars held esteem for was good, and whatever the scholars belittled was bad. The lords should kill them all. Allowing such people to live in this world is just disgusting. Some people don't believe it. I heard that the followers of the Little White Lotus sect all thought that their leader was threatened. There are certain people, even if they see it with their own eyes and hear with their own ears, as long as they don't want to believe it, they won't believe it anyway. Pitiful yet hateful. Most people in this world are like this, but they don't know it themselves. Lin Yuan was sitting behind a screen in the tea house, a pot of hot tea on his table. The tea master's hand was trembling slightly as he served on the side. He did not expect that such an important character would come to their tea house to drink tea, and he himself could come and serve him. When the tea master was pouring tea, his hand shook, and the tea spilled on the table. His breathing stopped for a moment, his body kneeling down before his brain even got the order. Lin Yuan was puzzled. The tea master couldn't even say a complete sentence. As soon as he spoke, his teeth would chatter against each other. South Bodhisattva, forgive me, Quin. Tien, personal reference used by commoners when speaking with royalty or high officials. Lin Yuan just stood up, seeming not to see the spilled tea on the table, and said to the tea master, "You are excused, you don't need to serve here." The tea master used both hands and feet to support himself, almost crawling out. Just a moment longer and he estimated that he would not be able to hold on anymore. When he was far away, the tea master touched his crotch area and found that it was soaked through. The smell of urine. Who urinated? You can't even hold in your pee, so what do you even come out in public for? The tea master quickly hid away, his face flushed red. It was unknown whether it was out of fear or excitement. Lin Yuan went out to walk around for once. The people following him all kept a comfortable distance not too far away. These people were equivalent to security guards, but unlike security guards, if he really did fall into danger, these people would rather protect him even at the cost of their own lives. But Lin Yuan felt that there was actually no need to be so vigilant. After all, few people had seen his face, and would not match his face with his identity. If he went out alone, at most he would just be regarded as a rich young master. But with so many people following him, this would only let others know that he had a special identity at just a glance. However, regarding this matter about him going out, Song Shixiao, Song Lian, Luo Ben, Wu Changqing and the others all had the same opinion. Mainly that his identity was now too noble, and if he met with any accident then everything would be over. Therefore, he should avoid going out if at all possible, and it would be even better to stay in the government official manner and remain under heavy protection. This way the officials could feel at ease. Lin Yuan coming out this time was his own stubborn decision. He felt that if he stayed in the government office, he would definitely get sick from the stuffiness. Faced with a bunch of official duties every day, his eyes were always dry and uncomfortable. There were no eye drops in this era after all. Many times, his eyes were so dry and sore that they teared up involuntarily. A few times, Song Shixiao stumbled upon his tearing eyes and thought that those were tears of sadness for the tragic situations of the common people in other parts of the empire. And for some reason this kind of misunderstanding even spread out among the people. Saying that he couldn't bear to see the common people's miserable state, crying every day, crying every night, crying so much his eyes almost went blind. Several times Lin Yuan heard the rumors that he had cried himself blind. Many people sincerely believed that he was blind. And Lin Yuan could not specially explain something small like this, so he could only pretend that he didn't know anything, The common people seemed to think that he could handle political affairs well even if he was blind. Looking at this from another perspective, the common people were quite confident in him. He was sitting in a tea house now, listening to the scholars outside talking loudly. There were also smart scholars who read more books but did not study themselves into bookish fools. They were more wise and far-sighted than others. The way I see it, the South Bodhisattva is going to bring under control the chaos below. To put it bluntly, the government is afraid that these cults will really encourage their believers to rebel. Just don't know how long it will take. I think this is a good thing. The common people are too ignorant. If the people above remain inactive and ignorant as well, the world will be even more chaotic. Isn't the dog caught like this? The emperor is enjoying debauchery and sumptuous entertainment in the palace every day. What does he care about the suffering of the people and what harm evil cults can do? The way I see it, he only cares whether the beauty serving him today is beautiful or not, and whether the wine served to him tomorrow is mellow or not. If you ask me, with an emperor like that, there is really no difference from a pig. In fact, even pigs are better. Pigs can be killed and eaten. Don't know since when, but the awe these scholars had for the emperor of Yuan dynasty had completely disappeared. But such scholars were still a minority. Most scholars dared not say anything even if they knew the absurdity of the emperor above them. The emperor was the emperor, and the emperor could do no wrong. It was the fault of the officials and ministers for not admonishing the emperor. In their opinion, even if the officials kowtowed until their heads broke open and they died, they must still try to convince the emperor. Lin Yuan listened while sitting in the private room with a teacup in his hand. He listened with great interest. Having been sitting on the top for so long he hadn't heard these words in a long time. The people that now surrounded him were shrewd human beings. Every one of them possessed twisting and turning schemes and thoughts, their words flawless of anything that could be used against them, and even Brother Dao rarely chatted with him like before. The distinction between monarch and minister was becoming more and more obvious. Although this was not a bad thing, Lin Yuan still felt lonely sometimes. Despite having lived 2 lifetimes, this was the first time Lin Yuan felt this feeling of coldness that came from standing in a high place. In such a position, he had no friends. The status gap was too great. He held the power of life and death in his hands and no one would be so lacking in self-awareness enough to try to be friends with Lin Yuan. Sometimes when Lin Yuan thought about it, he felt that being an emperor was also a very miserable thing. In order to be a sage ruler, one must be busy every day, waking up earlier than a rooster and sleeping later than a dog. There were so many officials, but each had his own thoughts and interests. There were so many concubines who wanted to lay on the same bed as the emperor, but the emperor didn't even know whether she was sincere or not. There were so many children, but these children who grew up in an environment full of power struggles, every one of them just wanted to get the most benefit out of him. Such a life seemed to be quite miserable. That was why there were so many incapable monarchs. If you were a bit more incapable, you could live a bit more happier. You could get rid of the officials you hated, and support the ones you liked, alienate the concubines you hated, and dote on the concubines you liked. Now listening to these scholars chatting, Lin Yuan found it to be very interesting, a smile curling the corners of his mouth, his appearance looking very cheered. The guards in civilian clothes looked at Lin Yuan's expression, and they were relieved. They were afraid that these scholars would anger the South Bodhisattva with their thoughtless words. It was nothing if these people were unlucky, but what if they vexed the South Bodhisattva badly? If one asked where Lin Yuan's most die-hard fans were, it must be the people around him. Sometimes Lin Yuan also found it incredible. These people followed him every day, and knew that he had to eat 3 meals a day and go to the toilet every day. How could they truly think he was a god? Was this not too bizarre? The scholars had now shifted from the topic of cults to the people's livelihood. One of them said, "Say, the South Bodhisattva spends all his energy on lowly people. Does he know that one must rely on scholars to govern the country? I wanted to say this before. What is happening in Pingjiang now? Scholars put their energy into forming cliques to please surname Wu. It's a mess. Have you ever seen any of them really become an official?" Several other scholars did not speak. Lin Yuan continued to listen with great interest. The man said again, "The way I see it, the South Bodhisattva is just letting them fight, and when they get tired of fighting, he'll come out. At that time those people will be obedient." Why do what you just said sound so chilling? That's right, this doesn't look like selecting an official, it looks more like raising goo. TN, goo equals legendary venomous insect. But I also think that the South Bodhisattva may look like he appreciates and respects talents, but it is just all words and not anything real. What do you mean by this? Is it possible to have scholars ask for official posts? Everyone still knows some shame. The person who spoke at the beginning said again, at first there were officials being conferred, and the title sounded nice and all. And the two courtesy officials didn't have to do anything. Just that, and they were still forced to their deaths. Mentioning the two who died, the scholars didn't know what to say. Although they felt a bit of sympathy, but more so they only felt a sense of schadenfreude or amusement. They all knew that the South Bodhisattva would definitely use scholars, it was just that he didn't want people to see him as being threatened by the scholars' power. So they didn't have to do anything, but just wait quietly. Those people who wanted to take the initiative could do so, and when those people hit their heads and bleed, wouldn't they benefit in the end? Lin Yuan sighed leisurely as he listened to the scholars talking. If this was in modern times, where there were so many scholars and civil servants everywhere, no one would have this kind of thinking. The root of the cause was that there were too few people who were literate in this era, and every one of them was precious. They were used to the days of being put on a pedestal. Brother Yang, having said so much, what are your good strategies? Someone suddenly asked, his tone not very good. This Brother Yang said, it is impossible to get anywhere with Lord Wu. If we want to go further, we might as well ask Magistrate Song. Magistrate Song was Song Lian. Someone sneered, that Magistrate Song has just arrived, and he has yet to even steady his feet, so how can he manage our affairs? Brother Yang, this is just my simple suggestion, it doesn't matter whether you believe me or not. Everyone, please enjoy yourselves, I will be leaving first. Lin Yuan turned his head and said to the guards around him, that surnamed Yang, pay some attention to him. The guards quickly said, yes. A couple of guards had already followed the man surnamed Yang out, and it was likely that they would follow the other to his residence. Lin Yuan didn't understand. He had put up such a big sign like Song Lian there in front of them. Song Lian's reputation was also quite prestigious. Moreover, there was still a shortage of people under his hand. Why didn't those scholars go see him instead of stubbornly sticking to Wu Chengqing's side? Was it possible that Wu Chengqing had some kind of special personal charm, and it was just that he had not discovered it? Chapter 94. Lao Ye, you were actually not in a hurry at all. The old servant had followed Song Lian since he was a child, and he had long become like family. At this moment, he said in a low voice while serving the rice, traveling thousands of miles over here, but I don't see any show of regard from the South Bodhisattva. He felt indignant on Song Lian's behalf. In his opinion, there was no one more capable and smarter than Song Lian. Song Lian sat down to eat, and said to the old servant, what's there to hurry? The old servant sighed again. Song Lian did not explain to the old servant. He knew in his heart that there were many people under Lin Yuan who wanted to succeed. If he was rashly entrusted with heavy responsibility, his life would not be easy in the future. The Song Shishao of today would be Song Lian in the future. Everyone would be staring at the seat under him, wanting nothing more than to replace him. Lin Yuan asked him to take care of the spreading literacy in order to help plate him with a layer of gold. With this layer of gold, he would be able to hand more important duties to him in the future. Song Lian also knew that he was a signboard, but so what? His starting point was much higher than that of ordinary people. This was a good thing. All the remaining members of the Little White Lotus sect were arrested because of Bao Jianga's confession. Most of these people didn't know one character from another. They were poor people who were originally oppressed. Once they managed to finally gain a little power, they themselves didn't regard human lives as human lives. One of them in particular, every room in his residence had locked up captives that included both men and women. They were not given any clothes in order to prevent them from escaping. The servants serving in his residence confessed that this person would visit different rooms every day, and sometimes several had to serve him together. Those who were still alive were the obedient ones, and those who were not obedient had died long ago. Recently, Song Lian was thinking of how to settle these victims. Send them home? He was afraid that they would die as soon as they returned home. This kind of thing could not be hidden. Putting aside their own family, just the stares and finger-pointing from outsiders could kill them. So Song Lian sent them to the barracks, to be army cooks, or something else such as army nurses. Discipline was very important in the barracks and everyone was exhausted every day, so naturally there was no energy left for gossip. This solution was actually praised by Lin Yuan, who said that Song Lian had mercy for the people, which startled Song Lian. Song Lian also noticed that Lin Yuan was like a father to the common people, not at all stingy with his tolerance and benevolence. He had two faces, one reserved for the common people and one for the officials. It had only been a little more than 2 months, but already many people in Pingqiang had come to sincerely support him. The old servant said, "I think that South Bodhisattva may really possess something extraordinary. I heard that he was originally part of the landowning class. There are so many landowners in this world, but there is only one like him." Song Lian ate a bite of food. Fate and circumstances are also important. If the world was peaceful, a person like Lin Yuan might be just a landowner his whole life. Fate and circumstances made him what he was now. Lin Yuan looked at the frontline battle report. Chen Beisong and Zhu Yunjiang had set off to Chuzhou together. Today Lin Yuan had nearly 1 million people in his army. Even though he included the auxiliary soldiers such as army cooks and logistics, this number was not to be underestimated. Although the number might not be the most crucial aspect, during war, people were the foundation of everything. The imperial court had already lost any military advantage in front of him now. Since the imperial court took away Tokto's military power and disbanded his army on the spot, the imperial court had lost its last barrier. Now their military was just for show. They may still have money, but don't even mention sending troops to attack Lin Yuan. In fact, even just making a gesture of goodwill, there was a likely chance that Lin Yuan would just ignore it. They could only place their hopes on the different rebel factions too busy fighting each other to the death. In this way they could eke out some breathing space. After having ruled this great and prosperous empire, only to be forced to return to the grasslands. This kind of disparity gap was not something everyone could accept. Looking at the battle report, Lin Yuan saw that the army's march went on smoothly and without any resistance. The one who of Chuzhou was surnamed Zhang, who did possess some skills. Despite being trapped in Chuzhou, he still clenched his teeth and persisted in holding off the siege. Daring enough to send out soldiers to directly fight with the enemy, he and Chen Beisong exchanged several rounds, so this time it was not a one-sided massacre. Lin Yuan's army was not without losses. According to the reported number of deaths, it was already more than 20,000. Although the casualties on Chuzhou's side were even more serious, the 20,000 he lost still caused his eyebrows to furrow. Song Shaishao took the battle report handed over by Lin Yuan and read it carefully before he said, "My lord, don't need to worry too much. Now the Yuan dynasty is just a grasshopper at the end of autumn. It won't be a few days before they are unable to jump up and down anymore. Instead, there are others who we need to focus on now." Lin Yuan nodded. It has been more than 2 years since Go Zixing died of illness, and now his power has been inherited by Sun Daya. "My lord, wants to capture Hozhu?" Song Shaishao knew Lin Yuan's meaning almost immediately. The days of the Yuan dynasty were numbered, so if they continue to keep their sights on it now it would be a matter of neglecting fundamentals and concentrating on details. On the other hand, the momentum of the several rebel factions were now soaring, to the point that they had no choice but to guard against them. Hozhu was Sun Daya's base. Lin Yuan wanted to eliminate Sun Daya and the others in one fell swoop, without leaving any chance at all. "Lin Yuan, I'm only afraid that it is not the right time." Song Shaishao broke out in a cold sweat, but his mind was clear and he quickly said, "My lord has acute foresight, but why not take things slowly? It cannot be captured this year, but next year or the year after next, it will definitely be captured." Although Song Shaishao knew that Lin Yuan's objective was the entire empire, he did not expect that he was preparing to deal with both the imperial court and Sun Daya at the same time. This caused him to be so excited that he could barely control himself. Perhaps it was not far from the day when Lin Yuan would conquer the whole empire. Song Shaishao said, "I wonder where is the Xiaoming emperor?" Lin Yuan thought for a while, and Laozi should likely be about to make his move. He had in Laozi encouraged Xiaoming emperor's ambition and desire for power. There could only be one boss in a country. Lu Futong held heavy power, but Xiaoming Emperor stood for orthodoxy. If Xiaoming Emperor really wanted to fight Lu Futong for power, there was no guarantee who would lose or win in the end. During the Qing dynasty, Abai held heavy power and controlled the imperial court, but didn't the Kangxi Emperor still manage to pull him from his seat of power? Because Kangxi was the emperor, he stood for orthodoxy and was the righteous ruler. Therefore, there would always be officials willing to gamble with him. Whereas in the hands of Abai, these people might not be able to succeed in their careers their whole lives. But so long as they won the gamble with Kangxi, they would instantly reach the summit of their careers. Lin Yuan didn't mind giving Xiaoming Emperor a little push. The fiercer and more chaotic Xiaoming Emperor and Lu Futong fought, the more benefits he would get. What happened to Chen Yuliang? Lin Yuan asked. Song Shaishao said, he killed Niwan Jun and annexed Niwan Jun's army, claiming to be a pacification commissioner, Tian, high military officials supervising the peace in border regions, or manager of governmental affairs. Lin Yuan nodded. I must leave it to Mr. to pay attention to Chen Yuliang's news. Song Shaishao didn't quite understand. In my opinion, Chen Yuliang does not seem to be a very important character now, just only occupying Wangshu. Above him there is also a Xu Shouyi. I'm afraid he won't be able to achieve much. Lin Yuan smiled and said, there is a kind of person who is born different from others. Next year would be the year for Chen Yuliang to shine, and he could not afford to ignore it, allowing Chen Yuliang to grow stronger. He didn't want to leave it till he finally confronted Chen Yuliang to regret not dealing with him in advance. And Lao Si, who was far away in Anfeng, let out a sneeze. He was currently standing out in the cool breeze while his wife was sorting out invitations. It had been more than half a year since they came to Anfeng. They used money to open the way, and even bought a minor official post. Although An Lao Si looked rough and boorish, he was actually a bold and careful man. During the past 6 months, they had been busy with socializing, money flowing from their pockets like water, but they quickly became acquainted with the minor officials below. There is no letter from Pingjiang. And Lao Si sighed, afraid that the South Bodhisattva had forgotten him. Lady An put away the invitations and took out paper and pen. She was literate and possessed good handwriting. Although she was a woman, she did not use the font favored by most women, but a cursive script that looked like flying dragons and dancing phoenixes. Because she was afraid that people would not be able to make out what she wrote, she could only restrain herself. As a result, the words that came out could only be considered neat. Lady An wrote while saying, you don't have to worry about this. If you have time to sigh, why not go out and walk around? And Lao Si, what's the use of going out for a walk? The way I see it, if I don't cut my lower half and become a eunuch, I won't be able to see Xiaoming Emperor at all in this life. Rather than saying that Lu Futong protected Han Liner too well, it was better to say that Lu Futong kept a tight grip on Han Liner. Other than special occasions, no one could see him. Except for the servants, the only people who could approach Han Liner were important officials. And these important officials were also Lu Futong's people. Lady An also sighed, we have to think of other ways. And Lao Si shook his head, how is it that simple? But letting the opportunity to get promoted and become rich slip away from him, and Lao Si could only feel heartache, wanting very much to beat his chest and stomp his feet. This time, if he could complete the South Bodhisattva's task and return later, even if he would not become an extremely important official, he would at least be entrusted with important duties. Wasn't this exactly what he wanted? Isn't it said that the Prime Minister wants to select concubines for Xiaoming Emperor? Lady An suddenly said, all the daughters of the officials could attend. This was a forced levy. The daughters of high-ranking officials were to be concubines, and the daughters of small officials and minor officials were to be palace maids. And Lao Si, give birth to a daughter now? It's too late. Lady An, we didn't make any exact statements. The family members we told our neighbors about are on the road, so how about we say that we brought our daughter over here ahead of time? And Lao Si, where can we find this daughter? Lady An smiled and said, did you forget? Hong Shu answered my letter, and I believe she is about to arrive in Anfeng soon. And Lao Si's eyes widened, wife, did you already think of this solution at that time? Lady An, when you men do things, you don't bother to hold any regard for women. I am a woman, so naturally I know what women can do. Hong Shu was more restrained than Tian Xiang and the others. So long as she was dressed simpler, she would give people the impression that she was just a flower vase. Only such a person would not be suspected, unlike Tian Xiang, who possessed a pair of eyes that appeared alluring even when not smiling. Even if she deliberately restrained herself, it was still easy for others to notice that something was out of place. It was more than 10 days later when Hongshu finally arrived. There were a few soldiers who were disguised as servants accompanying her, protecting her all the way to Anfeng. Hongshu had removed all makeup, and when standing next to Enlaosi, they really did look like they were father and daughter, the shape of their lips being somewhat similar. Lady An walked over and took Hongshu's hand. The two women walked ahead, and Enlaosi followed them as they walked through the streets. A visiting relative? This little lady is quite pretty. Enlaosi smiled and said, "This is my daughter who was on the way here. Now because the emperor is selecting concubines, I naturally must send someone to pick her up earlier. My father and mother are still behind." Everyone praised Hongshu while envying the An family for giving birth to such a fine daughter. Even if she were to enter the palace to be a little palace maid, based on her looks she would definitely attract the eyes of Xiaoming Emperor. Xiaoming Emperor was a young man, at the age where one had no scruples when it came to the business between men and women. After walking through the streets, the three finally returned to the small courtyard residence. Lady An sent Enlaosi to get hot water for Hongshu clean up. After sitting in the carriage for so many days, no matter how good Hongshu's physique was, it was not so good right now. She first wiped her face before leaning back on the chair and saying to Lady An, "This courtyard is not bad." Lady An smiled and said, "It costed 300 taels." Hongshu was taken aback. Lady An said, "How is it that easy to buy a house, finding the right connections, actually buying the house? Just the first part requires 200, and there are also the neighbors who we have to give some greeting gifts to. Sometimes, even 300 taels are not enough." Lady An asked Hongshu again, "How is Jiayu and Pingjiang? Although my husband and I are not in Pingjiang, we have always been thinking of the South Bodhisattva in our hearts." Hongshu took Lady An's hand. "Our Lord is always thinking of you both too." Lady An sighed and said, "We have no choice. I'm afraid we must trouble little sister in the future." Hongshu, "No trouble." She had requested to come here herself, and the South Bodhisattva also promised her that if this matter succeeded, she would also be able to serve as an official in the future. Even though she was a woman, she also wanted to try seizing this opportunity. What if she won in the end? People like her didn't have any illusions about men for a long time. She had seen too many men and knew that men were all like cats, and there were no cats that did not like to steal fish. Tien, expression for fickleness. Instead of relying on men, it was better to rely on oneself. There was no opportunity before, but now that there was, naturally she must firmly grasp it. When there were more women who became officials in the future, they would be able to ally with each other and join in an opposition to the same adversary. That way, there would be no fear that there would be no place for them. At night, Hongshu stayed in the same room with Lady An. There were always a lot of things to say between women. Lady An was also worried that Hongshu might feel discomfort, it being her first time in Anfeng, so she wanted to personally stay and accompany her. After they cleaned their faces and washed their feet, they lay on the bed under the same quilt. "You have suffered on the travel here. I wonder how it is back in Pingjiang." When they left, the South Bodhisattva was still in Jiayu. Hongshu said, "Nothing major. Those little thieves below are like always. As long as our Lord orders for rectification, where is there room for them to speak?" Lady An looked at Hongshu. "When you are called into the palace, you will be a palace maid first. You are beautiful, so I am afraid that the women in the palace. It would be bad if the task was not yet completed, only for Hongshu to be killed by those women." Hongshu said with a chuckle, "Sister, don't underestimate me. I grew up among women since I was a child. What methods do they have that I don't know? If no one values me after I enter the palace, naturally it will be convenient. If someone values me, I will join the side of her opponent. There will always be a way to guarantee my life." "Lady An, then you have to be careful, because there is a limit in how we can help you outside the palace." Hongshu nodded. "I won't hide it from sister. When I think about what I'm going to do, I can't sleep well day and night, the blood in my veins rushing and unable to calm down." She still remembered what the South Bodhisattva said to her, "You are going to be a spy." If you can succeed, you will topple an entire country. Are you afraid? She was so excited that she couldn't even lift her head. She said, "This slave is not afraid." So long as she succeeded, even if she was a woman, there was even a chance of being recorded in the history books. Even if it was not fame but notoriety, it would be enough. It was early in the morning when Hongshu was sent into the palace. The old palace maids and the eunuchs in the palace came to lead them away. The young girls got on the carriage, appearing nervous and excited. These daughters of minor officials were also dreaming. Once they entered the palace, if they could catch the eyes of Xiaoming Emperor, they and their families would be able to live a good life in the future. For girls, marrying was their second birth. Only by marrying a good man would the rest of their days in this life be good. But no good man could compare to the emperor. That was the emperor, the master of all things, and naturally their masters. If they could really become the emperor's women, they would also become half a master. The girls were afraid to talk at first in the carriage. After a while, they found that no one bothered with them, so they started chatting. "Which family are you from?" "Ah, we have the same surname, maybe hundreds of years ago we belonged to the same family." They only started to talk about business when they finished making small talk. "I wonder whether the consorts in the palace are easy to serve. I heard that the empress is a kind person, and treats the concubines like sisters. I heard that the maids serving the empress are all stunning. I wonder where we will be assigned." Hongshu listened quietly. Some people saw the beauty of Hongshu and started a conversation with her. "Which family are you from?" Hongshu said, "The An family in the western part of the city." "An family? I haven't heard of it." "I haven't heard of it either." Hongshu said, "We just moved here half a year ago, so it is natural that sisters do not know." After all, Anfeng was only a county. The palace was not big, but the construction was not bad. For these girls, this kind of building was what they could only look at before. They never had the extravagant hope to actually live inside it. Each and everyone wanted to move next to the carriage window. Only when the old palace maid outside gave them a look did they sit back again. Hongshu didn't feel much. She had seen many exquisite or lavish buildings, and in truth they were all the same. They were just for living in, and after a few days of living in it, there was really nothing all that special. After entering the palace, the new palace maids first received their palace uniforms, and then their living arrangements were made. They had to learn the rules for a period of time before they could be assigned to serve in the palace. The old palace maid saw that Hongshu had good looks, and she also felt that she would have a good future, so she was extremely strict on her training. Although strict, Hongshu had a good relationship with her in private. Hongshu was different from the other girls. Before she entered the palace, Lady An gave her a lot of money which she could use to manage the relationships and connections in the palace. The old palace maid took the bribe and felt that she may not be without good luck in the future, so she began to help teach Hongshu even more meticulously. "This sugar is good, you try." Hongshu stayed in the old palace maid's room, putting the cane sugar bought from the kitchen next to her with a respectful smile. Cane sugar was rare and even the kitchen did not have much. Hongshu spent a lot of money just to buy this small piece. Sure enough, the old palace maid couldn't look away when she saw the sugar. She swallowed and said, "How can I take your things?" But at the same time she also put the sugar in her mouth and squinted her eyes with relish. A palace maid like her who was in charge of the new palace maids didn't have much chance to get any good benefits. Only those who served in front of the imperial family had any position. She herself was reluctant to buy such sweets. After receiving the others' benefit, the old palace maid took Hongshu's hand and said, "Of the new palace maids who enter the palace, you are the most sensible and appropriate. The way I see it, everyone else is not as good as you. If you are lucky in the future, maybe you will." She glanced up towards the sky. Hongshu quickly said, "It's all because of your care. This slave is stupid, and if not for you, I'm afraid I would not be able to live long. In this slave's heart, you are this slave's mother." "Aye, good child." The wrinkles on the face of the old palace maid seemed to all be smiling. "In this case, let us recognize a godmother and goddaughter relationship. How about you calling me godmother?" Hongshu's eyes immediately turned red, and she knelt down quickly. "Godmother, please accept this daughter's kowtow." The old palace maid helped her up. Good child, when you are successful in the future, Don't forget your godmother. Hongshu, naturally. This slave might not know anything else, but I know that one must pay back kindness. The old palace maid smiled and said, next month, I will send you to Consort Li. Consort Li is the most favored. If you go to her, you will be able to see the emperor more often. It may be your chance at that time. Hongshu shook her head. Godmother, if I go to Consort Li, I'm afraid I will never have the opportunity to succeed, and I won't be able to repay Godmother. The old palace maid asked strangely, why do you say this? Hongshu whispered, Consort Li is the emperor's favorite. When the emperor goes to Consort Li's residence, how can others enter his eyes? Even if there are those who can, it can't be in front of Consort Li. Old palace maid, I actually forgot something like this. Hongshu lowered her head. Godmother, how about sending me to the empress's side? Old palace maid, they say that the empress is a kind person, but what's the use of kindness? The emperor doesn't love her, so she can only earn some reputation. When you go to her residence, won't you just wait in vain with her? Godmother, it is exactly because the emperor doesn't love her, so I must go serve her. Hongshu whispered, the empress is the emperor's legal wife, but she has been suppressed by Consort Li this whole time. Only because she is unable to gain favor herself will there be a chance for me. Hongshu understood women. The empress had been suppressed by Consort Li for so long, even if it was not herself, so long as someone could suppress Consort Li, she could also vent her discontent. If the empress was really as without wants or desires as in the rumors, then her reputation of kindness would not have spread far and wide. These women were locked up in a courtyard, waiting for the same man every day. It looked complicated, but in fact it was simple. As for how to let the empress see her and be willing to use her, she had her own ways. Wasn't it the same in the brothel? They were all vying for the top spot. Even if they themselves couldn't make it, they were willing to support the newcomers to suppress their old rivals. Sometimes what they wanted was no longer their own benefit, but to make the opponent uncomfortable. The old palace maid thought for a while. If you go to the empress's side, I'm afraid you can only start in the position of rough work palace maid. The empress had her own confidants, and these palace maids took care of the empress' internal treasury and daily life, controlling everything around the empress. Naturally, they would not let other palace maids get ahead. It was really difficult indeed for a rough work palace maid to climb up the ranks. Hongshu smiled and said, Godmother, we must make the gamble. The old palace maid took the hand of Hongshu and said with a smile, okay, this godmother will wait to enjoy the blessing of our shower from now on. Hongshu's current pseudonym was Anshu. The name Hongshu was too improper and ordinary girls would not have this kind of name. The corners of Hongshu's lips curved into a smile. Thank you, godmother. She was full of confidence. The Hongshu at this moment felt as omnipotent as the gods. Chapter 95. When trying to get up around 5 o'clock, it was fine in summer, but it was a huge torture in winter. Don't know how much perseverance it took to get out of the warm bed. Although it was already winter, it was not snowing here in Pingjiang. Lin Yuan changed into cotton clothes and languidly went to eat breakfast, a bowl of porridge, a dish of side vegetables and 2 steamed buns. Si Neong was still working as a cook. Her craftsmanship was average and couldn't be compared with those craftsmanship that were handed down in the family, but Lin Yuan was used to eating it, and he was not ready to change. Lin Yuan was lazy in the winter, but the common people were not like him. However, the winter days were better than in previous years, and the poor felt this change the deepest. It had been more than a month since winter. This winter had not continued to cool down compared to previous years, but it had not warmed up either. However, none of the provinces and counties under Lin Yuan's rule have reported large-scale deaths. When winter arrived, what Lin Yuan feared most was the people freezing to death. A large decrease in the population would reduce the vitality of the market. There was no other solution but to increase the population. However, after several additions to the population before, the merchants had practically already bought all the people that could be bought in the entire north. So now if there was a big population decrease again, the only way was to wait for the people to reproduce slowly by themselves and recuperate the population. But children were not able to inject energy into the market and enter the industry the moment they were born into the world. They needed at least more than 10 years. This winter, less than 10,000 people died from freezing, at least 2/3 less than in previous years. Lin Yuan praised the governors and county heads of various places, and he himself also let out a sigh of relief. Compared with Lin Yuan's situation, other places were completely different. After several consecutive years of non-income and major loss of labor, many rural families suffered a fatal blow. Most of them began to flee, some fled to the sites under Lin Yuan's rule, and some fled to other places. For example, Hozhu. Without Xinjiang, it was Sun De who inherited Go Zixing's position now. Sun De was a villain. He was a vengeful person and deceitful in many ways. He was not necessarily better than others in fighting wars, but he was very talented in instigating discord. In history, he died before Go Zixing, but due to the butterfly effect brought on by Lin Yuan's arrival, he was actually still doing quite well. General. The personal guard walked to the side of Sun De. At this time, he did not dare to speak anymore but could only wait for Sun De to finish enjoying the singing and dancing. Under the high platform sat the officials on both sides. Most of these officials were military officials. Sun De was of military background, so he attached importance to this. While he also had a lot of advisors, he was unwilling to call them officials. The dancers were graceful and lovely, appearing like spring flowers, thin-waist bent and swung like willow in the wind. They wore only thin gauze and had their nails painted red. They looked thin, but the places where one should be plump were very plump. Sun De smiled as he watched, and generously let the dancers serve his subordinates. He liked the feeling of rewarding and bestowing grace on others. This gave him a feeling of control over everything. The joys, anger, and sorrows of his subordinates were all controlled by him. Here, he was not the emperor, but he held the power of the emperor. As for Xiaoming Emperor? The corner of Sun De's mouth twitched into a sneer. A kid who had yet to even be weaned, what right and virtue did he have to tell him, Sun De, to bow his head? After the dancers stopped singing and dancing and went to serve the men one after another, Sun De picked up the wine cup, retracted his smile, and said to the personal guard, "What is it?" The personal guard whispered in his ears, "General, the report is here. The people from several villages were gone last night." Sun De was taken aback. They all ran away? The personal guard, death from starvation, from the cold, can't tell the difference. Sun De, how many people died? Guardians, more than 20,000. And this was what was reported, even more was not reported. Sun De pondered for a moment. Have people collect their corpses. If there is not enough food, tell the people there to give out food. The personal guard bowed his head and said yes. Yang family village, the village head's house. Where is there any food? Yang Rong kept pacing inside the house. The dry cigarette in his hand was lit, but he didn't take a puff. His son sat in the chairs and didn't say a word. Yang Rong frowned, expression bitter. Although he was the village head, his family also had to farm to support the family. Grain was harvested every year, but the harvest was not good. Not every household could get good fertile land. There were several types of land. The first-class farmlands were allocated to those of the Yang surname in the village, the inferior ones were allocated to outside surnames, and the most inferior ones were allocated to foreign households who migrated over from other regions. But as members of the same village, if some could not hand over the required amount of harvest, what could the rest do? It was not like they could just wait for the people above to punish them. He, the village head, must find a way to collect and hand over the required amount of grains. But after handing over the required grains, there wouldn't be much grain left in the village at all. Last year was not like this year. This year's tax was heavier than last year's. At least last year they were able to make it to the beginning of spring. But clearly, this year they were not going to be able to hold on until the arrival of spring. Yang Rong's hands trembled a little, and the dry cigarette fell to the ground. The lords above tell us to give out grain, but where is there any grain left in the granary? If they didn't give out the grains, then they would be going against the lords above. If they did, then their family would be finished. Give out whose grain? Their family's grain? But their own grain supply was not even enough for their family to hold on until spring. Even if they ate bean curd cakes every day, they would still not be able to make it through this winter. There was not enough firewood and they could not afford coal either. Firewood seemed to be easy to get, but the trees that could be cut have all been cut down these past few years. If they went deeper into the forests, they would encounter wild beasts. Yang Rong's eldest son said, "Father, let's run." Yang Rong's sons all followed the lead of their eldest brother, and quickly said, "Yes, father, there is no way left to survive." The eldest son said, "I heard that in Jiayu, as long as you can farm the land you can fill your stomach, no going hungry or suffering from the cold. If we run to Jiayu, the officials above won't be able to do anything to us." Yang Rong, do you think Dad didn't think about this? Then why don't you think about it? Can our entire family be able to escape? How many people are in the Yang family? 100. So many people, how can we run? Are the officials all blind and can't see so many of us? Your second granduncle, third granduncle, do you have the heart to leave them behind? The youngest son mumbled, "Our own lives are in danger, who cares about them?" Yang Rong yelled, "Absurdity. I'll tell you all. So long as I am still alive, you will forget such thoughts as soon as possible. The reason our Yang family can have today is because of the family teachings. No matter when and where, the Yang family must remain united. Only in this way other people will not come to bully us, only in this way can we grow in strength. Is there anyone in this world who is more trustworthy than one's own relatives?" The youngest son grew up cherished by him. He was Yang Rong's youngest son who he got when he was already quite getting on in the years. The old clam gave birth to pearls, thus, his nickname was Zhuzhu. As a result, he was especially not afraid of his parents. He retorted, "Then it's not as if the entire family of 100 should just die together? How about you go and ask them if they are willing to give out grain to help our family tide over this difficult situation?" Yang Rong suddenly lost his words. Grain was the lifeblood of farmers, and they could have nothing but they couldn't not have grain. Yang Rong knew in his heart that if he asked the Yang family to take out the grain, the first to turn their faces would be them. Besides, last time there was a draft, didn't you think of a way to keep us from being drafted? The youngest son said, "Our cousins have all gone, and especially second uncle, none of his sons are left. Who knows, maybe in their hearts they have a lot of hatred for you. Maybe as soon as they hear about this, they would pray that our whole family would die." Yang Rong, beast. Shut up. The youngest son was instantly displeased. "I'm telling the truth. If you are not willing to listen, then what do you want to listen to? Listen to me say that the Yang family is still all of one mind now, that they all listen to you as the village head and they will do whatever you say? I dared to say this, but do you dare to believe it?" Yang Rong breathed heavily and coughed vigorously. The several sons hurried over to support him and pat him on the back. The eldest son said at this time, "Dad, although what Zhuzhu said sounds a bit ugly, it is still reasonable. Please think about it some more." Yang Rong grabbed the eldest son's wrist and his turbid eyes stared at his already tall and fully grown eldest son, asking tremblingly, "Eldest, you think this way too?" Eldest son, "Dad, because of the military draft, our uncles all hate us." Yang Rong had 5 brothers in total, and including him there were 6 in total. Of these 5 brothers, some had up to 4 sons, but some only had 1. Drafting applied to the same surname, that was, all with the same surname counted as a household. In order to prevent his own sons from being drafted, Yang Rong would report only the sons of his brothers every year. After they left, it was unknown whether they were still alive or not, as not even a single letter was sent back. His brothers hated him to his bones. After all, even the most harmonious relatives would become enemies after such a thing. But Yang Rong was still pretending to be deaf and blind, wishfully thinking that the brotherly feelings between them were still there. It was just that they couldn't get around this curve at the moment. But when this curve was bypassed, they would still be the same good brothers as before, their relationship as unbroken as ever. Eldest son said, "Dad, you originally have selfish motives. It's no wonder our uncles hate you." Yang Rong coughed painfully. "Who did I do this for?" "Who?" Youngest son, "Dad, you did this for our little family. Since it is all for survival, how come you can think about our family when it's the military draft, but now you have to think about the whole family?" Yang Rong, "I am the patriarch." The youngest son whispered, "Not many recognize you as the patriarch anymore." Yang Rong became angry, and pointed at his youngest son as he breathed harshly and said, "You shouldn't have been born back then. Even if you were born, You should have just been drowned. That way I don't need to be vexed this much at my old age. Youngest son, Dad, we are trying to talk reason here. His sons were all grown up and had their own ideas. The younger ones listened to the eldest and don't know when it began, but they now listened more to the eldest brother instead of him, their dad. Yang Rong knew that he couldn't win against them anymore. No one would listen to him. Yang Rong closed his eyes and said softly, "Eldest, we listen to you. You have the ability, so take care of your brothers in the future." The eldest son replied in lowly, "Dad, I know, us brothers will remain united." Yang Rong, He had harmed his brothers miserably, and he had no face left to say this to his sons. And this same scene appeared in many villages and towns in Hozhu. Sunday also couldn't ever have thought that this method of benefiting and showing benevolence on the people would end up like this. In Chapter 96. The common people were unwilling to travel long distances. When they couldn't even get enough to eat, it was even more impossible to find the means for transportation. Horses were military supplies, and even if the people had money, they couldn't buy them. Cows were also luxury goods, and only the landowning class could afford to use them. As a result, if the common people wanted to travel, they must do so with just their two legs. Hundreds of people in Hozhu embarked on the road of exile. Those with males in the family were better off. They could pull a wooden cart while the females pushed from the back, the children following on the side of the cart. If there were no males and only females in the family, they could only flee with light luggage. They would not bring clothes, but only some dry food and tinder. Among the people who fled from Hozhu, not many were males. Naturally, the officials also discovered this. They sent troops to station at exits to prevent them from leaving. If a woman wanted to go out, they could ignore it. After all, with fewer people consuming food the better, but men were not allowed. Men could farm, smith iron, and serve as soldiers. Even if their physiques were weak, they could also serve as auxiliary soldiers. In any case, they were useful in every aspect. So the women escaped more smoothly. They gathered together, supported each other, and walked towards the unknown. Yang Rong's family was also stuck on the way out to the city. The men were driven behind temporary fences, like cows and horses, surrounded by soldiers. They didn't dare to move in fear that their heads would be chopped off by the soldiers. They sat on the ground, and the men around them were similar, sitting in place like stray dogs. The females of the Yang family were still outside and have not left. They were waiting for their husbands and sons. "Soldier sir, soldier sir." The eldest Yang brother's wife begged the soldier, who was about the same age as her son. She knelt down on her knees and grabbed the young soldier's trousers. "We are all good citizens, we just want to go out of the city to see our relatives. Soldier sir." She kowtowed to the young soldier. The young soldier looked less than 14 years old, but his skin was abnormally rough, and there was an abnormal flush on his face. He looked at the eldest Yang brother's wife and remembered his mother, so he whispered, "This is the Lord's business, they won't die." The eldest Yang brother's wife looked at him in confusion. The young soldier said again, "Either be a soldier or go do hard labor." The eldest Yang brother's wife felt as if the sky in front of her instantly darkened. Whether it was being a soldier or a hard laborer, both were dead ends. Soldiers could not return home unless they became disabled, but what about the rest of the family if they became disabled? The family couldn't afford to feed him, so being disabled was no different than being dead. As for being a hard laborer, they would have to work till death. When the eldest Yang brother's wife returned to the group of female relatives, both the sister-in-laws and mother-in-law came to ask her. What did they say? What did the soldier sir say? When will they let them out? The eldest Yang brother's wife was still in a daze. Her mother-in-law scolded her, usually speaking more than anyone else. "Why did you become a sullen gourd now? Did you not kowtow just now? Go kowtow. Kowtow until the skin on your forehead breaks. The soldier sir will definitely answer you." The eldest Yang brother's wife shuddered. She lowered her head and said with tears, "The soldier sir said that they would either be soldiers or hard laborers." The female family members had no words for a while, and it took some time before someone broke the silence with a low sob. Even her mother-in-law couldn't say a word. "What should we do?" a female family member asked. The eldest Yang brother's wife sniffed, "Stay, or go." Her mother-in-law said at this time, "You all go, I will stay." Mother-in-law. Mother-in-law, I will stay. You follow eldest sister-in-law and them. Eldest sister-in-law and the others all have children, but I don't have any. I will stay and accompany my husband. The mother-in-law shook her head and said, I am old and can't walk that long distance. Listen to me, take the children away, raise them well, and tell them not to forget their fathers. I won't care if you remarry in the future. But you must not forget that the blood running in their veins is that of our Yang family. Otherwise, even if I die, I won't be able to close my eyes. The female family members cried together, leaving only an old woman behind, and then left this sad place with the children. The boys were dressed up as girls. Fortunately, they were still young. Unless they took off their pants, no one could tell the difference. The eldest Yang brother and the others were also watching from a distance, watching the women crying, and watching the women walking away. Yang Rong smiled on the side, fortunately, the children can go. Yang Fourth, the youngest son, said, I don't have a son yet. No one responded to him. The children were led by their mothers, and the youngest asked, Mom, what about Grandma? The woman bit her lip and said, Grandma is waiting for your dad and Grandpa to go together. The child had a pair of innocent eyes. Then how come we don't wait? The woman said with difficulty, You'll know when you grow up. These words were often used to coax children, but when it was used too frequently, the children would also no longer believe it. Although the children were young, they could also sense the emotions of the adults. Their keen intuition would stop them from making further inquiries. Yang eldest and the others were detained for 3 days, and during these 3 days, more people were pulled in one after another. Don't know how many times this has happened. They even encountered a few familiar people, and they also discovered that the soldiers didn't care what they were doing or what they said to each other. So long as they obediently remain in place and not think of escaping, they would not easily come to trouble them. After waiting for another period of time, don't know how many days and nights, Yang eldest and the others lived on a bean curd cake a day. Their luggage was taken away, and whatever the soldiers gave them they must eat. If they could not stand the hunger they could only dig the grass roots from the ground to eat. In such a way, they actually managed to hold on for so long. When the soldiers told them to go out, they had already forgotten how long it had been since they were locked up. There should be no one trying to leave anymore, right? Everyone was thinking this. They were driven together like cows and sheep, and the older soldier would pick them out. Able-bodied men were shooed to one side, the old, the weak, the sick and the disabled were shooed to another side, and Yang Rong himself was also separated from his sons. Soldier sir, they are all my sons. They cannot be without me. Please be merciful, please be merciful. Yang Rong cried painfully and refused to let go after grabbing the soldier's sleeves. The sons also shouted, Soldier sir, he is our father, truly. The older soldier was unlike the newly recruited young soldier. He was accustomed to life and death on the battlefield, and his heart had learned to be as hard as iron. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been given this task. At this time, his face appeared cold, looking like the god of death as he said in a mocking tone, Do you think you are a father and son army? Are you even able to hold a weapon at your age? Don't drag your sons to do hard labor with you. It was better to be a soldier than a hard laborer. Soldiers had food to eat and could also take an occasional rest. If you were lucky and made some achievements, you could rise up the ranks and become an official. But as a hard laborer you were likely to do hard labor until death. A human-shaped beast of burden that could not stop working until death. The sons still begged, my lord, please, please, my dad just looks old for his age, he is strong, he can serve as a soldier. But Yang Rong didn't beg anymore. He said to the older soldier, Soldier sir, my sons are strong and capable, and they are sure to be good soldiers, so I will be a hard laborer. The older soldier couldn't help looking at Yang Rong a few more times, and said with amusement, You have a fatherly heart. In that case, you father and sons can talk some more, and I will come again later. As the father and sons cried together, the older soldier sat on the side of the grass mound and looked on. He was also old. The next time he went onto the battlefield, he was afraid that he would not be able to come back alive. The soldiers of this age all suffered some pain of all sorts, the old wounds not yet healed, only for new injuries to be added. The physique could not be compared with young people. What are you looking at? Thinking of your son? After finishing his task, a fellow soldier sat down beside the older soldier. The older soldier shook his head and said, "Where would I get a son? I don't even have a wife, let alone a son." He was thinking of his father. He remembered that his family was poor when he was a child, and his father sold him to support his younger brothers. As time passed, he even forgot what his family was like. As a slave servant in a landowner's family, being beaten and scolded was commonplace. The maid's monthly salary was more than that of those who did rough work. As a slave servant, only those serving at the side of the masters would there be any future. Later, the family he served died and the family property was confiscated. Servants like them had a new place to go. Men became soldiers, and women. The older soldier sighed. He turned his head and looked at the Yang family, feeling a little envious. If he hadn't been sold by his father back then, what would he be like now? Would his father be willing to be a hard laborer for his sons, or would he ask his sons to be hard laborers with him so that he would not suffer too much? The older soldier asked his comrade, "Have you finished writing your will?" "Comrade, I don't know how to read or write, and it costs money to find someone to write it for me. I told my wife and son that if I can't go back, she can remarry if she wants to remarry. I only insist on one thing, my son can't change his surname." The older soldier smiled and said, "You are better than me. You still have 2 people you can miss." The comrade also smiled. It was difficult to marry a wife. Even ordinary village wives were more willing to find a farmer than a soldier for a husband. At least farmers could farm the land and grow grain. Those who were soldiers couldn't take care of the family as they were far away and couldn't act as a pillar of support for the family back home. Even a monthly salary might not be issued every month, or be able to reach their family's hands. For example, his comrade's wife used to be a prostitute, one who had been driven out due to being too old. Otherwise he would not be able to even marry a prostitute. The comrade said to the older soldier, "Next time if we can come back alive, I'll treat you to a drink at my house. The tofu made by my wife tastes like meat." The older soldier, "Then I really have to try it." The both of them looked relaxed. When so many comrades died around them, it seemed as if dying was no longer all that frightening. They were afraid before and couldn't stop shaking when they heard that they had to go onto the battlefield. But later they didn't seem to be as afraid. Death had become an extremely common thing. The older soldier said to his comrade, "The weather is good today. I don't know what kind of weather it will be on the day we leave for battle." The comrade also looked up at the sky. "Who knows, the heavens won't let us know in advance. You also shouldn't be too kind, it's about time to lead the people over." The older soldier stood up, his feet stomping on the ground. His shoes were too big, and it always felt a little unstable when worn. "Over there. Come with me." Yang Rong took his eldest son's hand. "Son, listen to Dad, don't insist on fighting, escape if you can." Yang eldest could no longer speak from crying so hard. How to escape? Who could even escape? This was their fate. Chapter 97. After having been stagnated for nearly 2 years, Lin Yuan once again felt the large-scale influx of the population. However, unlike before, in addition to the Han people from other places, there were even Mongolians flooding in, although the number was not large, about 20 to 30, and they were all from the same family. They probably heard the news that Toktoa was in Pingjiang. Although they were still not sure, they took the risk. Toktoa was still very popular. He himself also sighed when he heard about this. The imperial court did not remember his good deeds, but there were some people who still remembered. This family had a high degree of Sinicization, and even the oldest of them could speak Chinese. Only their clothing and dressing style maintained their own ethnic style. Lin Yuan could only have someone to settle them first, and then call Toktoa over. Unlike the Han people, the Mongols generally followed their own regime. When the Yuan dynasty still existed, they all gathered at the capital whenever something happened. Later, when the Yuan dynasty was defeated, they all migrated back to the northern grasslands. Although they lived mixed with the Han people, and after so many years there have also been many intermarriages, there were still very few truly equal interactions. Tokto adjusted his clothes. Standing in front of the door, he was both nervous and uneasy. "Father?" Halajang was still holding fried dough sticks in his hand and a bowl of soy milk in his other hand. He asked strangely, "What are you doing standing at the door?" Toktoa turned around and glanced at Halajiang. After all, Halajiang was still young, and young people easily forget. He seemed to have already forgotten life back in the imperial court, and that his meaning in life was to inherit his father's position. Now no one mentioned this anymore. In recent days, Halajiang was practically absent from home almost all day long. Toktoa just watched and never asked for any explanation. Halajiang was no longer the child who needed parental care. He was learning this new world by himself, wanting to find his own place in this new world and take back the glory that once belonged to his family. How could Toktoa say to Halajiang, "Give up, we are Mongolians, and you can only sit around waiting to die"? He couldn't bear to say this to Halajiang. Rather than living soberly, sometimes it was better to be a little confused. This way life would be happier. Halajiang and Chulin have gotten very close recently. The two were about the same age and they were also living in the same place. Halajiang was angry with Chulin at first, although he knew that they had different standpoints and Chulin couldn't do anything else. But it didn't feel good to be deceived, especially since he was sincere on his part while Chulin's sincerity was compromised. It was Chulin who visited several times and made a bunch of guarantees before the two reconciled their relationship back to before. Now Halajiang was doing business with Chulin. The business Chulin had to take care of was very varied. He could be found wherever there was a need for someone. No one dared to let him do important things as Chulin was really not someone who could do practical things, but small, unimportant tasks were still fine. For example, receiving envoys from the imperial court. The imperial court now sent people to Lin Yuan every few months, mainly for recruiting him over and expressing goodwill. After Halajiang had breakfast, he separated from Toktoa, the two having different things to take care of. Toktoa looked at his son's back and sighed silently. In the eyes of Halajiang, was it likely that there was no place for the emperor anymore? Even if there was, it was no longer the one in the Yuan imperial capital. Halajiang was tall and vigorous. He was young and moved like the wind. He was like a young cheetah who, while still being young, was able to stand on his own. In addition, as his appearance was obviously different from that of the Han people, no matter where he went there were always many people watching him. "Brother Chu." Halajiang ran to the side of Chulin who was chatting with people on the street. Seeing that he arrived, Chulin hurriedly said to the stall owner, "I really am busy. I have to leave first, sorry." After saying this, Chulin grabbed Halajiang's sleeve and ran away like a ghost was chasing behind him. Halajiang was puzzled. So, after the two stopped, Halajiang asked, "What are you running for? That uncle doesn't look like he has a bad temper. Did you offend him in some way?" Chulin's face blushed. He was born too good-looking, and when the blush stained his cheeks, it only emphasized his red lips and pale skin, his eyes seeming to be like two pools of spring. With just a glance from him like this, it could captivate and enchant people. Halajiang swallowed, looked away and said, "Where are we going? What are you doing today?" Chulin said depressedly, entertaining the envoys. "I only sent one away last month, and another one is here again this month. Always eating and drinking with them. My dad said I even look a little fatter than before." Halajiang said seriously, "You're not fat." Chulin smiled at Halajiang. And for some reason, Halajiang let out a shudder, and his face also turned a little red. But his skin was dark and it couldn't be noticed as easily. The two of them walked forward along the road. Halajiang wanted to say something several times, but when he opened his mouth he didn't know what to say. He secretly looked at Chulin's profile. Chulin was born too good-looking. No matter how one looked at him, he was always beautiful. If before Chulin's beauty only existed on the outside, then Chulin's beauty now went deep into his bones. After washing away the low self-esteem and confusion, Chulin was like a gem that had the dust covering it wiped away. Halajiang suddenly asked, "Your parents haven't arranged a marriage for you yet?" When these words were spoken, both of them were taken aback. Chulin shook his head and said, "I am not going to marry." He was now doing even better than his older brother. When going out, others would call him Lord Chu. Even if he did not have an exact official position, everyone knew that the South Bodhisattva liked him and was willing to use him. Now if he was to find an in-law, it would definitely be a better family than that of his sister-in-laws. At that time, how would his older brother act? Once he married, he would have to face a more complicated situation. Would he have to fight for the position of the next patriarch with his older brother in the end? He would definitely win, but what about his older brother? It was better not getting married. Anyway, he didn't have much interest in the female sex. Halajang felt his throat become hot and dry, and he felt that his face had become even hotter. He was clearly walking on the streets, with many people passing by. But when he heard Chulin say that he wouldn't marry, his heart couldn't help becoming hot. Impulsively and without thinking he also said, "I'm not going to marry either." Chulin looked at Halajang strangely, and Halajang was also looking at him. Chulin quickly retracted his gaze as if frightened by something, and said, "Walk quicker, lest the envoy waits for too long. Although he is a member of the court, courtesy must not be lacking, and let others get a handle on us." While he said so, he quickened his pace. Halajang didn't understand, but he also followed Chulin quickly. On the way, Halajang wanted to talk to Chulin again. But every time he spoke, Chulin would change the subject. Compared with Halajang, Toktoa's situation was different. He was sitting in a carriage, and the destination of the carriage was the house of that Mongolian family. The name of the head of this family was Buhi. He had a big dark face, broad hands and feet, a strong body, and his shoulders were also extremely wide, making his head look rather small. Buhi married a Han Chinese wife. His wife gave birth to 3 sons and 3 daughters. Both the eldest son and the eldest daughter had already married. According to what Buhi said, as early as a few hundred years ago, his family was likely servants of Toktoa's family. In short, he insisted on a relationship of some sort with Toktoa. When Toktoa was invited to the main seat, he did not refuse. Only when he sat down could the others sit down. "Where did you come from?" Toktoa also felt strange. When most Mongolians see that something was wrong, they would generally take their families to the imperial capital, so how come they came to Pingjiang instead? Buhi's wife poured 2 cups of milk. Toktoa took a sip, and suddenly sighed. He hadn't tasted such a flavor in a long time. "Buhi, we came here from Zhongking." He rubbed his knees and said with a smile, "On the road, I heard people say you are here, so we came." It was simply impossible to continue traveling on the road. There were too many people and belongings. Although they didn't bring cattle and sheep with them, they brought everything else they could. With so many things, naturally they couldn't make a long journey. Toktoa didn't know what to say. He thought they would have some other plans and considerations, but he was just told very honestly, "There is nothing else, we just couldn't bear the cost." Toktoa could only console, "Since you are here, then just live with peace of mind." Buhi still had his own worries. He said in a worried tone, "They are all Han people." The relationship between the Han people and them was not bad a few years ago. But as the state of the world got worse, their relationship also got worse. The Han people felt that the Mongols would harm them, and the Mongols also felt that the Han people would harm them. Toktoa asked him, "Then what can you do?" Buhi counted with his fingers, "I only have 2 daughters left to be married, and 2 sons not yet married." He said, "I'm going to find a matchmaker." This was Buhi's wisdom. Becoming in-laws was the best way to assimilate into a new environment. He quickly found a son-in-law. There was no shortage of son-in-laws. There were young men eager to marry a wife all over. But Buhi couldn't find wives for his remaining 2 sons, so he did another shocking thing. After asking Toktoa, he stuffed his 2 sons respectively into the homes of 2 widows. Both widows were not newly widowed. They had been widows for at least 10 years, since before the world became chaotic. They also had no children. Because they were widows, their parents and brothers could not visit them too much. They locked themselves up at home all year round. Sometimes even the neighbors don't even remember when was the last time they had come out. When everyone was still watching the show, Buhi had already gained a firm foothold in Pingjiang. The 2 girls married into a big local family. This kind of big family refers to the large number of people within the clan. The 2 sons married the widows, and the widow's natal family also started making contact with them. Buhi also rented land outside the city near the mountains, bought cows and sheep, and quickly became familiar with the surrounding residents. The ewes and cows they bought had just given birth to their young, and were full of milk. So Buhi sold the milk bucket by bucket. With a place to live, with relatives and friends, and with work, their hearts could finally be at ease. Lin Yuan looked at the dairy products that his servants brought over. There was a lingering smell on the tip of his nose, as unprocessed raw milk could not avoid such a smell. Lin Yuan said to the servants, "Go and ask Buhi if his family can make milk tofu." If it could be made, the soldiers would have more convenient food to replenish energy when they march. The people below would not report such trivial matters to him. If it was reported to him, he really would be annoyed to death, but if it was not reported to him, he would be unable to stop himself from thinking about it all the time. Lin Yuan sighed, feeling that he was born to toil. Chapter 98. The fire in the barracks had not yet been extinguished, and the soldiers sat chatting around the bonfire. They were wearing newly handed-out cotton-padded clothes, all of the same color and the same size. They were tightly tightened with their belts so the thinner ones could also wear it with no problem. Holding a cup with hot water in it, many even took off their shoes to roast their feet by the fire. Soldiers couldn't leave the barracks without order. Even the commanders above would face execution if they secretly ran out of the barracks. They were strictly managed, and those who executed the military law did not give face to anyone. And because of this, the common people living near the barracks didn't have to be so scared or on edge. The soldiers must stay in the barracks for a month before they could get 2 days off. For these 2 days, they also had to report their itinerary clearly. But there were also a lot of entertainment activities in the barracks. For example, Lin Yuan had people create game sport equipment like basketballs and kuju, tian, ancient Chinese football. There were also some simple fitness equipment, similar to the equipment found in gyms. So after their required training for the day was over, soldiers could also find things to amuse themselves. Zhao Laosi was holding a cup of water. He pulled out a sweet potato from the embers of the extinguished fire under his feet, peeled it and ate it in 2 bites. The person next to him laughed at him. "You actually still hid one, what are you so anxious for? It's not as if you won't have anything to eat, in fact there will be meat broth tomorrow. Isn't that better than just eating this alone?" Zhao Laosi finished the sweet potato in 2 bites and didn't feel all that full. He had fled over here as a refugee and his wife and children died on the road. He had nowhere to go and had no relatives in Jiayu. He knew that being a soldier was dangerous and risky, but he still gritted his teeth and joined the army. Such a good thing, there will actually be more tomorrow? Zhao Laosi licked his teeth, wanting to lick any remaining sweet potatoes from his teeth. His colleague laughed at him. "How is this considered a good thing? Nowadays, it is planted the most outside. This thing grows faster, and its yield is quite a lot." His colleague was also a farmer in the past, and when mentioning this topic he became particularly energetic. He moved closer and chatted with Zhao Laosi in detail. "Every day the growth is visible to the eye. Just a little bit, and you can harvest so much." The skin of the colleague was dark, and when he smiled all of his teeth were exposed. Zhao Laosi said, "I like to eat sweet potatoes the best." The people around him said, "I also like to eat sweet potatoes. Regular potatoes are not as sweet potatoes and not as fragrant." "Then sweet potatoes and potatoes, can it only be grown here?" Zhao Laosi asked in a low voice. "Colleague, these 2 things aren't picky on the land very much. You can grow it even on inferior land, and still their harvest is more than that of the others." Zhao Laosi's eyes widened. Then on my way over here, I didn't see anyone planting it." With the rapid increase in the production of sweet potatoes on Lin Yuan's land, the consistently high food prices had slowly begun to fall down. However, Lin Yuan had been keeping the prices of sweet potatoes and potatoes from decreasing too much so that people would know that planting these 2 crops could still make money. People were naturally profit-seeking. Perhaps when still hungry, they would think it was a good thing to grow sweet potatoes and potatoes, but once the problem of filling the stomach was solved, of course they would want to earn more. Now, other than a few big cities that could achieve a balance of income, self-producing and self-consuming, other small cities still had to rely on him for handing out food supplies. As a result, the sweet potatoes and potatoes did not spread beyond his territory. After all, his own people still didn't have enough food. It was not that no one wanted the seeds. There were many inquiries from various forces. Rations and fodder were the top priority no matter when. Soldiers would only be obedient and have the strength to be able to fight on the battlefield when fully fed. But not even 3 years had passed since the last time Lin Yuan carried out executions and established his prestige. The merchants were tempted, but few really dared to make any moves. They were all staring at each other and wanted to see when someone else would make a move. Sometimes violent deterrence could indeed bring relatively long-term stability. Some people will be drawn to visit the town in 3 days. How will they make the draw this time? The soldiers were still chatting. Zhao Laosi was a newcomer, and he didn't understand what the others were talking about, looking at his colleagues blankly. His colleague explained, it is to bring food and clothing to those in the poor mountains and remote areas. Zhao Laosi was taken aback. Why bother, isn't that a waste? Colleague, do you know whose soldier you are? Zhao Laosi wondered. The general's soldier? The colleagues laughed loudly. We are the soldiers of the South Bodhisattva. You don't even know this? Our South Bodhisattva was born with a Buddha's heart, and can't bear to see anyone suffer. That's why we are sent to save those who are suffering. Zhao Laosi was even more puzzled. These soldiers actually sincerely love that South Bodhisattva? Wasn't the truth in the world that good people would be deceived, and good horses would be ridden by others? Zhao Laosi had also seen good people, and most of them had no good ending. On the contrary, the selfish, the mean and the cruel people lived better. Without the South Bodhisattva, I would have died from starvation a long time ago. His colleague pointed at his own nose. I was thin and lame at the time. But after entering the army, it was all thanks to my colleagues for taking care of me and helping me recuperate. Back then, who would waste food on me? The crowd was noisy and lively. Don't know who started talking first, but the topic soon turned to talking of the time before, and the idle chatting quickly turned into a memorial meeting. When the soldiers were called early the next morning, Zhao Laosi was also selected for the visit to the town. The comrades in the same squad all expressed their envy to Zhao Laosi after the training. It's a rare visit outside the barracks, so don't frown. Although traveling on the road is a little rough, it's also quite interesting. Zhao Laosi felt strange. Interesting? His colleague hooked his shoulders and said, it's better than being bored in the barracks. You can also compete in hunting and all the prey you hunt is yours. If there is no prey, you can eat dry rations. Traveling during the day and camping at night. It's tiring, but it's a rare, happy kind of tiring. However, Zhao Laosi said, I don't want to go out, I just want to stay in the barracks. He really liked the barracks. There were thick and warm clothes, at least 2 sets a year. He could eat his fill every day, and even if there was no meat, he could eat as much sweet potatoes and potatoes he wanted. Each person had his own bed, and although it was small, there was no problem fitting a grown man, and even turning over was not difficult. No one had ever slept in a bed back in his old home. He was afraid of going out this time. What if he was left behind halfway on the road? What if he got lost? He wasn't familiar with the area, maybe he might starve to death on the road. Zhao Laosi couldn't sleep. He was afraid of being dragged away in the middle of the night, and he didn't want to go anywhere. When it was time to gather in line, the officer in charge who counted the number found that there was a missing person. The military discipline in the barracks was strict, and there was no such thing as being late or leaving early. Moreover, the system was squad-based, so it was not easy for people to have the courage to make mistakes, as it would implicate the entire squad. Zhao Laosi? Which squad is this? Where is the squad leader? Call the squad leader over. The squad leader was also very speechless. I heard him say before going to bed yesterday that he didn't want to go out, but I didn't expect him to have the guts to be a deserter. It was impossible for such a big living person to disappear from under people's eyes in an instant. I've said before that it's best not to select new recruits. Recruits all had this problem. They would stay in the barracks happily at first, and would be unwilling to take a step out of the barracks even if beaten to death. Only when they got acquainted with the rest and knew the operations inside the barracks would they become at ease. There were no deserters here, but soldiers who were unwilling to leave the barracks were no different from deserters to some extent. Zhao Laosi was finally found under his bed. Don't know how he squeezed in, and now he could barely even get out, so they could only take apart the bed. Zhao Laosi didn't dare to move and lay on the ground crying. While crying, he said, I don't eat a lot of food, I won't go out, don't drive me away. A big grown man crying with tears and snot, it really gave people goosebumps. The squad leader could only say to the officer in charge, he probably won't be able to go like this. The officer sighed. "If you ask me, newcomers shouldn't be given this chance to go out." Zhao Laozi got his wish and did not follow the team out. He preferred the small dormitory and the same training every day. Replacing Zhao Laozi was also a new recruit in the same batch. His name was Fengus Heng. He was chosen because of his good performance, not too weak-looking physique, and being more courageous than Zhao Laozi. Fengus Heng was carrying a backpack. Each soldier was carrying this thing on his back, which contained dry rations and some other necessities. These backpacks were all sewn by women. They were made of the strongest coarse cloth and had a large capacity. There were 2 shoulder straps and a cloth strip underneath which could be tied around the waist, making it much easier when traveling or marching. Fengus Heng had traveled on the road before, but he never traveled like this. Back then, his stomach was always deflated and he was always thinking about whether he could find work after he reached the destination. Now his stomach was full and although tired, his body still had energy. He even had the energy to look around the farmland when the team rested. This has been barren for several years. Fengus Heng looked at the barren land, feeling distressed. Others sighed, "One can't eat enough while staying on this land." Farmers planted the land, but they abandoned the land and left their hometown because they couldn't have enough to eat. This sounded like a joke but it was very true. Fengus Heng remembered that when he was in his hometown, his parents were busy farming all year round, like hard-working oxen. They never had a rest day. When it came time for harvest, the field would be covered in golden wheat, rustling in the breeze. But in contrast, their granary would always only have a little bit of grain. At that time, he didn't understand why he still couldn't get enough to eat despite there being so much food in the field. Fengus Heng bent down, pinched a handful of soil, and put it in his mouth. He said to the person next to him, "This land is good, it's fertile land. You also have the ability to distinguish soil? Don't only old veteran farmers know this?" Fengus Heng smiled shyly, "Not necessarily accurate, I just know a little bit. By the way, since there are so many fields here, why don't I see any villages?" Fengus Heng stood up and looked into the distance strangely. Someone replied, "The original people here either fled or died. Few people remember what the village was originally called. But I estimate that it will get better in the future." Fengus Heng asked, "What do you mean? Those people will come back?" "That's probably not going to happen, but the South Bodhisattva will definitely have people come over." "Yes, the South Bodhisattva is here, so people will definitely come. The South Bodhisattva is just too kind-hearted. It's all thanks to the South Bodhisattva." Chapter 99. Unlike Jiayu, all of Pingjiang's policies were slowly and imperceptibly changed by Lin Yuan. He was now used to calling a bunch of people over to discuss matters, and then choose to adopt the suggestions that spoke to his own heart. This way it would not seem like a dictatorship, but in fact it was still a dictatorship. His own policies were just being spoken from another person's mouth. Lin Yuan now finally understood why the people above would not listen to the opinions of the people below. The eyes of the people below were easily confined to the small acre of land in front of them. There were few people who possessed a big picture of the overall situation. Everyone had a mouth, had their own thinking, and had interests they wanted to fight for. If results were to be achieved, everyone had to think in one direction, work hard towards the same goal, each performing their own duties, neither asking too much nor thinking too much. Only this way would things be done quickly and beautifully. Lin Yuan knew that he was walking on a very dangerous road. Once he made a mistake, it would be the common people who didn't know anything paying for his mistakes. But he also knew that he had to walk this way, and he had to firmly believe that the path he was taking was correct. Recently, Lin Yuan has become more and more taciturn. The more he thought, the more thoughts he had, the feeling he gave people changed even more. Song Shixiao faced Lin Yuan every day, and he could sense the feeling most obviously. In Song Shixiao's words, Lin Yuan was reserved and introverted. "Before you were like a blade. Although sharp, it was also fragile." Song Shixiao poured tea for Lin Yuan while saying, "Now you have a scabbard." After washing away the restless impatience, Lin Yuan became more and more steady and unflustered. Lin Yuan looked at Song Shixiao earnestly. He hadn't looked at people so earnestly for a long time. Was Song Shixiao so old? "These years, it's all thanks to Mr. Lin Yuan said earnestly. Song Shixiao has also changed recently. His temper had improved, Lin Yuan could feel it. Last year Song Shixiao was not as amiable as this year. At that time, he probably regarded everyone as imaginary enemies, wishing nothing more than to tear everyone apart, leaving only him being of use by Lin Yuan's side. But Song Shixiao's loyalty was beyond doubt. Lin Yuan took the tea that Song Shixiao handed over. The monarch and the ministers sat by the window and drank tea together. There was a square table under the windowsill and a chessboard on top. Lin Yuan had become interested in Go recently and would play it occasionally. Song Shixiao put down a black stone and said without looking up, "The north has been settled. Whether it is the imperial court or anyone else, they won't be able to cause any storms in the next few years. But not in the south. Various forces from all quarters are eyeing each other covetously." Lin Yuan nodded and placed down a white stone. The two sides exchanged moves back and forth. Song Shixiao smiled and said, "My lord's chess skills have become more and more exquisite. Given time, it may be difficult to find an opponent." Lin Yuan laughed. "This flattery is laid beautifully." Song Shixiao also laughed. Song Shixiao sighed, "I wonder when Xiaoming Emperor and Lu Futong will." Most of the rebels now rebelled under the name of the Red Turban Army. Where did the Red Turban Army come from? From the White Lotus sect. Who was the orthodox Red Turban Army? Naturally, it was Xiaoming Emperor. Although Han Shantong died, his son succeeded his position and Xiaoming Emperor was the continuation of orthodoxy. Even if Lu Futong now held the most power in the regime by representing the Xiaoming Emperor, he would not dare to kill Xiaoming Emperor and succeed him. The reason was simple. If even the so-called orthodox ruler could be killed, then as he himself was not even orthodox, wouldn't he be even easier to kill? Just like the Yuan dynasty, after the first case of rebellion, subsequent rebellions emerged endlessly. If Lu Futong himself set an example of killing the monarch, there would be many people who would also want to do the same and replace him. In addition to this, there was another point, and that was resistance to Lu Futong. Among those who followed Xiaoming Emperor, there was also a faction that supported Han Shantong and the so-called orthodoxy. Once Xiaoming Emperor fell, the Red Turban Army would no longer have a just cause. Although those who held power would not let go of their power and authority, the common people did not understand these kinds of things. At least within a short period of time, the Red Turban Army would suffer heavy losses. At that time, it would be their opportunity. The more Song Shixiao thought about it, the more he wanted to just rush over to Lu Futong or Xiaoming Emperor and tell them to kill each other. So long as he was allowed to go over, he would definitely encourage the ambitions of one of them and instigate them to fight each other to the death. If it hadn't been for Ping Jiang having too many things to deal with back then, he would have set off on his own a long time ago, so how could he have asked An Laozi to go instead? Song Shixiao lowered his head. It seemed that he should assign the tasks and responsibilities to those below. He suppressed the people under him and did not let them emerge. But when something really needed to be done, not even one could be found to handle things. Lin Yuan looked at Song Shixiao's expression and knew what he was thinking. He said with schadenfreude amusement, "Now you know that one person can't do everything?" Song Shixiao crinkled his old face into a smile. "That's also because my lord cares about this official." Lin Yuan also earnestly said, "Then don't become too proud and spoiled from the favor." Song Shixiao also answered playfully, "The young man's heart is like an intangible wind, and this official is now old, not as good as the wildflowers and grass outside. How can I keep the heart of the young man without using some means?" Lin Yuan drank a sip of tea, motionless like a mountain. "You just want nothing more than to be the only one of use in this world, but you are already at this age and you should know to combine work and rest. Otherwise once you fall down from tiredness, the people below will still jump out. And at that time when I use them you will become jealous again." Song Shixiao suddenly stopped talking. Lin Yuan's half-joking words sounded in his ears and landed in his heart, his nose suddenly stinging a bit. He discovered that Lin Yuan had really been showing tolerance for him and caring for him all this time. He had been occupying the position beside him in a domineering way, and it was not that Lin Yuan didn't know this, he just didn't mind indulging him. This caused Song Shixiao's heart to surge like the waves, and it was difficult to calm down. Lin Yuan asked him, "Is there anyone under you who can be of use?" Song Shaishao didn't hide it this time, and said, I have looked them over. Some can only be minor officials and I've found jobs for them already. There are also a few good ones, only that their tempers are too hard and need to be polished. Lin Yuan nodded, suddenly saying, I remember there was one named Zhang Qingfeng. How is he? A man who has been frustrated for half his life. Song Shaishao's eyes had a tiny trace of pity in them, but this bit of pity wasn't worth all that much. Being a civil official is enough. He would make a clean and uncorrupted official. Lin Yuan, that's fine, there just happened to be a need for a district head. Pingjiang had its administrative work units replanned, village heads, town heads, county heads, district heads and city mayors. As for Lin Yuan, he did not yet have a clear political title. Everyone called him Lord, and the common people called him South Bodhisattva. Although ambiguous, it was not a bad thing. Song Shaishao also agreed. According to Song Shaishao's words, even if my lord has not yet been named emperor, he is already holding the emperor's power. As long as he has power, the title is not as important. The district head did not seem to have much power, but in fact he was considered to be half a senior provincial official. The city mayor looked to have a lot of power, but his power was divided. Generally speaking, the district head had more real powers than the city mayor, but the city mayor also had the power to supervise and inspect. The district head did not need to be transferred, but the city mayor must be replaced every 5 years. Zhang Qingfeng has finally met with great lucky. Song Shaishao thought in his heart, if the monarch was someone else, who would use such an official? Just based on what he did before was enough for him to be left out in the cold until his death. Lin Yuan placed down his last white stone. The people under you, find a place for them as soon as possible, and make the best use of them, otherwise it's a waste of food. Song Shaishao quickly responded, yes. And Wu Changqing? Lin Yuan didn't have any expression. Go and give him a reminder, lest his head get too big. Song Shaishao lowered his head, a smile at the corner of his mouth. Wu Changqing meeting with misfortune makes him very happy. Wu Changqing was talented, but there were also drawbacks. Lin Yuan used him because of his talents, but because of the drawbacks in his personality, he dared not trust him. He had a common problem common to ordinary scholars, he loved power. He also had a common problem common to all sycophantic officials, he loved to play with power. Now that Wu Changqing had a certain prestige among scholars, he was eager to challenge Song Shaishao in the arena. But Lin Yuan was not willing to help him. To be precise, Wu Changqing did not have the same importance as Song Shaishao did in his heart. He could be sure that Song Shaishao would not betray him no matter what situation he was in. Even if he died, so long as his bloodline was still alive, Song Shaishao would be loyal to his bloodline. But he was not sure whether Wu Changqing could do the same. Besides, there was only one Song Shaishao, whereas there were tens of millions of Wu Changqings. Without Wu Changqing, he would let out a few regretful sighs at most, bestowing his family a gift during the New Year's every year, and then forget him after a few years. But without Song Shaishao, he might have a headache for a long time, and maybe he might never find a successor to take Song Shaishao's place. Song Shaishao drank the last sip of tea and said to Lin Yuan, my lord wants to give him a warning, then why not promote one of the people under him? Aren't those scholars gathering around him just for this chance? Lin Yuan raised his eyebrows. Mr. already has a candidate. His words were an affirmative statement, not a question. Song Shaishao lowered his head, and said humbly, I just observed more and inquired more, all to share the worries for my master. Lin Yuan didn't bother to pick on this matter with him either. Tell me. Song Shaishao, now there is one in his manor, whose surname is Yang, and his name is Yang Shaokeng. I am not clear how he is as a person, but he was an advisor who had handled many cases before. He is quite good at solving cases and we lack such a person. Lin Yuan thought for a while, have him go work as a Li Zheng. Li Zheng was a new name. It had been implemented in Jiayu, and basically meant a judge. Lin Yuan divided the power, different departments managed different things, and personal power would be reduced. Although he was not sure whether this would be better than before, it at least would not be worse. How bold of him. Wu Changqing nearly fell down with anger. I had treated him very well. Wu Changqing's eldest son looked at his father's face, and hurriedly went over to console. Father, don't be angry, it will be bad for your health. People like him originally only came for this. Wu Changqing was so angry that he slapped the table, his veins popping out. Yang Xiaokang. Despicable villain, shameless rascal. The eldest son did not dare to speak. His father had the biggest say in the family, and whenever his father was present, no one could override his words. How vexing. How vexing. Wu Changqing clutched his stomach hurting with anger. I shouldn't have let him stay in the manor. The once guest of the old days had now climbed up the sky ladder, and this sky ladder that he stepped on was him, Wu Changqing. He had to send him off with a smile on his face, but without outsiders, this anger finally exploded. He might not be ignorant of the mindset of those above, but he could not hate Lin Yuan, he could only hate Yang Xiaokang. Chapter 100. It was so quiet there was not a sound to be heard. Hong Shu was sitting next to the bed. She lived in a very small room and shared a big bed with 6 other palace maids. There was no separate closet and no separate dressing table. This was perhaps Hong Shu's most hard-pressed living conditions in her nearly 20 years of life. Since she began seeing clients, she only enjoyed the best resources of the brothel, becoming the top courtesan. For Hong Shu, her destiny was already decided. The best future she had imagined was to catch a man at her best age. This man might be a rich merchant or a young master, and he would redeem her from the brothel. She would then move from a larger cage to a smaller one. She would be favored, and then fall out of favor. Her background meant that she could not become the lawful wife of anyone, married with all the rights and trappings of an official wife. Or maybe she would not be redeemed. When she got old, she would become an old lady that would clean and sweep the floors in the brothel, her back bent over as she wiped the steps and the ground. No one would know that she was a graceful beauty when she was younger. She had thought a lot, but never had she thought she would sit in such a place, and never had she thought that her past experience would become capital she now relied on. And Shu, don't keep sitting, come and go to bed. The maid squinted her eyes while lying on the bed and called to her, we have to get up early for work tomorrow. Hong Shu climbed onto the bed and covered herself with the quilt, pulling it up to her nose. The maids whispered quietly about the day. I can't sleep, the supervisor punished me to kneel in the afternoon, and my knee still hurts. The little palace maids were the daughters of minor officials. They had not enjoyed the luxurious life of nobles and those in power. The only difference they had from the daughters of the common people was that they didn't have to go hungry. But they still had to do work as minor officials' salary plus money from bribery was not enough for the family to really enjoy any luxuries. The supervisor is so fierce. They are hiding the empress. The senior palace maids were in charge of everything around the empress and they acted as her eyes and ears. They suppressed the little palace maids underneath, just because they were afraid that if they climbed up the ranks, they themselves would have to come down. After all, the positions around the empress were limited. But in the naive imagination of the little palace maids, the empress was being hidden by the senior palace maids. Hong Shu listened quietly, without saying a word. The empress has a good temper. I heard that she doesn't punish people with a board beating even when they make a mistake. The empress doesn't beat us, but if the supervisors want to beat us, it still hurts even when it's hitting our palms with a stick. I heard that if the palm is hit 20 times it will be swollen, and if it is 50 times it will be crippled. We can't make mistakes. A beating is a small thing but the embarrassment is a big thing. My family is still waiting for me to come out of the palace. Although they would be much older when they finally left the palace, girls who had been in the palace received better marriage prospects. It was a proud thing to be able to enter the palace. I heard that Consort Li is the most favored, and the emperor goes to her every day. Consort Li looks beautiful. They all say Consort Li is more beautiful than noble Consort Yang. Would the emperor love her if she was not beautiful? Go to bed, we have work tomorrow, don't wake up the supervisor. The little palace maids stopped talking. Some closed their eyes to sleep, and some kept their eyes open. When meeting the equally open eyes of a fellow little sister next to them, they would bury their heads in the quilt and giggle. The sun was shining on the earth, and this temporary small imperial palace city awakened from the dark night. The eunuchs and the palace maids moved about in hurried steps. The spring morning cold had yet to disperse, so they walked in the imperial palace city wearing cotton-padded clothes. Hong Shu followed the other maids with her head bowed as they walked forward. Their eyes always looked in front of them. On the road, no one knew what was ahead, who was ahead. "And Shu, you come with me," the leading palace maid called over Hong Shu. Hong Shu walked up to her in a practiced manner in accordance with etiquette. Hong Shu had her head lowered, her eyes confused and uneasy, just like every young nervous girl. The palace maid smiled at Hong Shu. "I see that you are honest and well behaved. It happens that there was an older sister who left the palace, and the Empress's palace is missing a tea-serving palace maid." Hong Shu's eyes brightened, and she looked very happy. She said carefully, "I bought rouge for Sister Jiang." The palace maid's surname was Jiang, and she pretended to cough. "I was not aiming for this benefit, I just looked at your obedience and decided to give you a chance." Hong Shu nodded repeatedly. I know, it's sister who is thinking of me." She had given the palace maid Jiang a lot of benefits, and almost all the gold she brought into the palace was given to her. Only then did she manage to reach this point. If palace maid Jiang did not fulfill her promise, then she would be in a more difficult position in the palace. At that time, she could only send a letter to Enlausia and the others to come up with a new method, as the original plan failed and she could only become one of the informants they had in the palace. The palace maid Jiang took the small box of rouge that Hong Shu handed over, pursed her lips and smiled. "If you gain the favor of the Empress in the future, don't forget me." "Hong Shu, I will take sister's good words to heart. If one day I've done well for myself, I will not forget sister's great kindness. Let's go." The palace maid led the way and told Hong Shu, "You have to be more cautious after going to the Empress's palace. You are smart, so I don't need to mention anything else. Just remember one sentence. You don't have to worry about others except for Lady Zhao. Be careful, she has the most face next to the Empress. It won't be much of a problem if you offend others. But if you offend her, you won't even know how you died." Hong Shu asked in a low voice, "Is Lady Zhao very fierce?" The palace maid Jiang led her through the small door. No one passed by here and it was considered a blind spot. She looked around and made sure that no one was passing by before pulling Hong Shu over and saying, "Lady Zhao has been serving the Empress for a long time." Before the Empress entered the palace, she was already the most favored person around the Empress. The palace maid Jiang said, "She doesn't love money, so don't think of giving her gifts. Lady Zhao likes honest people." Hong Shu understood, and smiled sweetly. "Thank you, sister." The palace maid Jiang smiled and said, "If you do well, I will be better too, won't I?" Those who did well in the palace and managed to be seen by the master, might actually even be able to come back to the palace to serve as senior palace ladies even if they had already married and had children. If one was lucky and the master had a child, one could even come back to be a nanny, which was practically the same as reaching the sky in one step. So long as one could be remembered by the master, everything else was empty and superficial. There was not much that the tea-serving maid could do, it was just brewing tea for the Empress. If the maids next to the Empress had the intention, then one would not even have the chance to bring the tea to the Empress. But even so, those who were vying for this position fight fiercely for it. "Lady Zhao, this is Shu." The palace maid Jiang brought Hong Shu to Lady Zhao, as all the palace maids in the Empress's palace had to go through her. Lady Zhao was in her 30s. She had a stern face and a stiff manner from her older age. Her lips were thin and made her look a little bit mean. Her back was slightly stooped, the result of years of bending over. No matter how much face she had in front of the Empress, and how much power she held in her hand, she was just a servant who couldn't straighten up when facing her master. Lady Zhao just took a look at Hong Shu, and said mildly, "Be honest and obedient, do what you should do, and don't think about what you shouldn't." Hong Shu lowered her head, and she could only see her skirt. "Yes, thank you lady for your teaching." "Lady Zhao, it's not to that extent. Follow me." Hong Shu had learned some tea skills before and her tea art was very good. As a courtesan from a brothel she must be proficient in music, chess, calligraphy and painting. Being a high-grade prostitute in ancient times was also a kind of technical job. Not bad. Lady Zhao drank a sip of tea, and finally made such a comment, "The craftsmanship is passable." Hong Shu showed an appropriately measured expression of excitement. Lady Zhao glanced at her sideways, and Hong Shu shrank her neck and tucked in her chin. "Lady Zhao, such unsteadiness, how is that seemly? This is the Empress's palace, the place of example for the women of the world." Hongshu lowered her head. Yes. Lady Zhao looked away. You are a servant of the Empress, and you must be loyal to the Empress. If I learn that you have been communicating information to the outside, I will let you know that while you may have come in here vertically, you will be going out horizontally. After Lady Zhao finished making her warnings, Hongshu was led away by other palace maids. Although it was the palace of the Empress, it was actually not all that big. After all, Anfeng was only a county and it could not be compared with most cities, nor could it be compared with the real Imperial Palace City. It was just that everyone pretended that this was the Imperial Palace City. After pretending for a long time, this palace also seemed to have become more magnificent. Hongshu looked at all this calmly, but in her heart she was full of contempt. The women here took pride in being the Empress's maids, and they tied their own personal honor and disgrace to one person. If this person tells them to live, they will live, and if it is to die, then they will die. How similar was it to herself once upon a time? She once also placed everything about herself on men. But then she discovered that her life must be in her own hands if she wanted to live happily. Just like with her standing here now, not because she wanted to bring honor to the family, nor because she was forced to be helpless. She had chosen all this by herself. So she could face all the advantages and disadvantages that came of this choice. These women couldn't. If the Empress fell from grace, their lives would also be over, and they wouldn't even know what they did wrong. Hongshu stood in the tea room with countless tea leaves behind her. The room was filled with a strong tea fragrance. Her wrists were very thin and white. She was wearing a palace dress and her hair was pinned up in the most ordinary hairstyle. She had no expression on her face, and the surrounding maids also all did their own things. No one made a sound, as if they were standing in a mausoleum instead. The Empress's palace sounded honorable on the surface, but what was so honorable if only the Empress was present in the palace? It was only honorable wherever the Emperor was. People outside all say that the Empress was kind and benevolent, but no one had ever thought deeper. If the Empress was really that kind and benevolent, why was Consort Li still not pregnant despite having the Emperor's favor every night? The Emperor was young and strong and virile, and yet there was no prince or princess being born in the palace. Consort Li was also at a ripe age with imperial physicians at her call and the most favor from the Emperor. It was natural for the coupling of man and woman to result in children. The corners of Hongshu's lips were curved in a smile. She was not afraid of the Empress's cruelty and greed, but she was afraid that the Empress really had no wants and desires. A person who had no wants and desires was the most terrifying person. If this person didn't want anything at all, then how could others seek what they want from her? The more fierce she was, the more likely it was that Hongshu would climb up the ranks. Hongshu took a deep breath. It was not a day's cold that could freeze 3 feet deep of ice. She must continue to lay dormant, and take things slowly and gradually.